Just for context, my boyfriend and I are homeless, and we live in our car. There is a road that leads to a quiet beach on the bay near some train tracks, and there is only one road to exit. So not a lot of people come down this way, unless it's for beach access. People going to work in the industrial plants on the road, none of which were open, or going to an AA meeting. Again, none of which were open at the time, or if they are sleeping in their cars as well. Nothing in the area was open except maybe a couple of bars, and even those were a good 3 or 4 blocks away. Most of the stretch of road has 8-hour parking signs, so there are usually at least a few other people camped for the night, most of whom we have seen before, but tonight there wasn't as many, just a few vehicles taking advantage of the overnight parking. We parked a little further up the road than we normally do, hoping to get a better internet connection. It was a little after 12:30 a.m. and we were relaxing watching YouTube with the dog, starting to get sleepy when we heard a car pull up behind us with their lights off. We cover our windows totally around so nobody can see in, but we can peek out if we move the blanket, and we can see headlights from cars passing or approaching. My boyfriend said it was a van. We didn't think much of it and kept trying to watch our show, annoyed with the spotty Wi-Fi connection. There were a few words exchanged on what sounded like was the other side of the street, not behind us where the van pulled up. It sounded like there were 3 or 4 people. A little bit later, the van drove off. Then we heard a knock on my side of the window, driver's side. We shut off the volume on the laptop and called out. "Yeah?" Silence, so we called out. "Can we help you?" But again, there was nothing. It was then that I realized that my door was unlocked, so I quickly locked it. After about 30 seconds of quietness, I pulled open the cover and nobody was there. Whatever. There are sometimes bums walking around. They could have thought we were someone else. It was silent for a while, then we could see in the light of the street lamp, through the crack on the sun reflector covering the front windscreen, the silhouette of somebody walking around the front of the car slowly. It was another solid minute after we saw the movement before we heard a quieter tapping on the passenger side window. This time my boyfriend pulled the cover down almost right away, and again we didn't see who it was. Right after this, there was a knock on my door again. It was right about then we realized that there was still more than one person around the car. There was no time for one person to get from the passenger side to my side between the second and third knock, and we had heard more than one voice prior. I started to think that maybe not everybody had gotten back inside from the van before it drove off. So after the third knock, I pulled my window covers down again almost all the way. I'm super annoyed and on edge by now. There was a skinny white male, probably in his mid-30s to early 40s, holding a flashlight and something else scooped awkwardly in the other hand. Almost like he was keeping it under his sweater, but we couldn't make it out. The windows were steamed up from us breathing inside with the windows shut tight, so it was really difficult to see out. He said, "Hey, I need a jump." Interesting, since there are no stores nearby. No reason to be down here at 1 a.m. We said, "Sorry, we're just about to take off. We're in a rush." He got frustrated and whined. "Come on, I've been down here for hours." Okay, if he had been down here for hours, why did he A, not ask us to help him out about 45 minutes prior when we pulled up, parked, let our dog out to eat, go potty, etc., and get our bed set up? Or B, attempt to start the car at any point? We never heard a motor rev up and an attempt to turn the engine or even the jingling of keys. Another creepy reason is why I could only see him. He said I need a jump. I've been down here for hours when I could clearly hear that there was more than one person around, but we couldn't see them. For one reason or another, they were standing out of view, not making themselves known. After this, he grumbled and went across the street to a white car with black rims that we had seen before, but not associated with him. I got this awful feeling in my gut, and even though all the windows were steamed up, I started the car and told my boyfriend to start wiping the windows so I could see, and I just started driving. We could feel that there was something sinister about the whole situation. For one reason or another, they were trying to get us to open a door or window. When that didn't work, they didn't respond because they didn't have a good reason made up yet, so after a couple of attempts to get us to open the door, they gave us the sob story, hoping we would get them out of the car so they could either steal the car while we were trying to help them or get to my boyfriend, either him directly or so they could get to me, or they were going to rob us for the laptop, which I am sure they could hear and see the glow of on the screen. The possibilities are unsettling and endless. Or Maybe he was just a guy who happened to need a jump at 1 a.m., nowhere near any stores or houses, and I'm the jerk that left some poor guy down there on the side of the road, right? Well, we drove to McDonald's to eat something and parked in the back driveway of someone we knew so that we weren't right out in the open anymore. The lock on our trunk recently broke and is held together with only bungee cords, with most of our belongings inside, so it worries me that it could make us an easier target for thieves. The next morning, we were down there again and the white car with black rims was still there. Only now the back window was busted out, and the man was nowhere in sight. I think it was never his car to begin with. I think all of those people came in the van and one of them drove off so that the rest of them could rob someone outright or so they could break into the parked cars on the side of the street when no one was in them. It was really stressful and my boyfriend had been rattled for days. We are nervous to park in the same spot, so we are now looking to rent a residential driveway to park at night where we won't be so vulnerable. My boyfriend teased the dog for not barking, but I think it was very intuitive of him because if we needed to pretend we were inside, we would have been able to do so. Maybe it would have scared them right off. I like knowing he will wait and watch me to know what to do in stressful situations. I'm just so relieved that I was not down there by myself. Even the two of us together were pretty nervous, knowing that we were likely outnumbered, but if it were just a 120-pound female like myself in the car alone, I am worried they may have been a bit more aggressive about getting the door opened. Sometimes I think I watch too many murder investigation shows and conspiracy theory videos, and that may make me paranoid. Maybe it's the fact that my grandfather was a sex crimes and homicide detective for 30 years in the same area, and I grew up with him constantly warning me of the dangers that lurk in the dark and what can happen to a person. He taught me that real monsters are not boogeymen. They are just plain men. This happened about a year and a half ago. I was at work, night shift, a little past midnight and ordered DoorDash for myself and my supervisor since it was her birthday. I was happy to see I had the same driver as last time as I work in a small building among other identical buildings with a convoluted road system in between them all. It can be a little bit confusing for somebody not used to it. I had been watching the map and went outside once he was close by. I stood under a cluster of bright lights in our parking lot. Wearing neon yellow, you couldn't miss me. I immediately get a call from my driver asking me to come to him. I look around and don't see anyone until I walk a couple of yards to the center of the lot. He's sitting on the side of my building by the dumpster, where there is no light. He also has his lights off. I'm thinking, what the heck, dude? I start waving my arms and telling him I'm in front of the building. He's on the side. He hangs up and just chills there for a minute, I guess. At this point, I'm really annoyed because our food is getting cold, and this guy delivered to me in this exact same spot a week before. Finally, he turns his lights on and comes over to me. As soon as he pulls up, he's speaking another language into his phone, which then translates to English. Something like, "Hello, I am practicing English. I need new friends. Will you be my friend?" And then puts the phone towards me. I feel like I am speaking to a child because, hello, this is inappropriate, and I just say, "Oh, that's a cool app," and look at him waiting. He keeps speaking into the app about needing friends, and I tell him my supervisor is waiting for me and reach my hand out for the food. He tries to touch my hand and then asks for my number. At this point, the fact that he had tried to get me in the dark plus his persistence turned my growing annoyance into fear. I tell him I need the food and he asks me to get in his car in perfect English. At this moment, somebody in my sister's building comes out and makes their way over to the lot. He finally gives me my food and scurries off, which freaked me out. Why after all that would he speed off at the sight of another person? Clearly his intentions were not good. I reported all of this to DoorDash at the time as well as my local police and on social media, and it turns out he'd done this to somebody who lives 2 miles away from me. She had also ordered late at night, and he apparently asked her if she lived alone and if they could hang out while holding her food hostage. DoorDash assured me that they had deactivated him, but his boldness plus the fact that he seemed to only drive late at night makes me think that he does this a lot and has probably already assaulted someone. I was about 9 years old, so this was probably 1996, playing in my family's huge front yard. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside of city limits. A man drove up and pulled his car over on the side of the road. He got out and greeted me. He then told me that he was lost and asked me how to get to a specific city over an hour away. I knew the name of the city, but obviously not how to get there. I pointed the direction of the highway and said I thought that might be the right way. I vaguely remember telling him I didn't know and that he should ask an adult. To this, the man started making comments such as, "Oh, well, I'm sure you can help me. You look like a really smart girl." Then the man pulls out a map and sets it on the hood of his car. Asks me if I can come show him on his map where the specific city was. As a child, it didn't even dawn on me that the stranger had a map and would be able to find the city himself. I just kept saying I didn't know how to get to the city he was asking about. He kept telling me I looked smart and emphasizing that he was lost and needed help. And because somebody nearby was mowing their lawn, it was hard to hear, so the man would say he couldn't hear me and ask me to come closer. I didn't move closer, but he did. My parents had planted hedges around our yard, but at the time the shrubs were pretty short. At this point, the man had moved from the front of his car and started crossing the hedge line, asking me to come closer so he could hear me. Now here's the part I wasn't aware of, and my mom filled me in on when I was older. She and my dad were inside the home. We have a bunch of windows facing the front yard, but also a bunch of trees between the house and yard so my parents wouldn't necessarily see me. My mom said our dog Annie, a 3-year-old German Shepherd, Golden Retriever, and Boxer mix, was going apeshit. Annie was barking non-stop while running from the door and windows over to my parents over and over again. My parents were in the middle of something and just thought Annie probably had to pee. My mom went to let Annie outside, and my mom said the moment she opened the door, she flew off the porch. My mom swears Annie was hauling ass so fast that the dog didn't even touch the porch. Now back to the scene between me and the stranger. He was at the hedge line, maybe 12 feet across from me. I'm just standing there and suddenly Annie comes shooting across the yard and stops in front of me. She was the sweetest dog and we have had her since she was a puppy. The runt of her litter, but still a good-sized gal considering her mix of breeds. Now here Annie was. She had a full-on mohawk from head to tail, standing straight up. She was baring her teeth, snarling and snapping towards the strange man. I remember looking at her and trying to get her to calm down. Still, this didn't stop the strange man. He slowly took a step forward into the yard. Annie seemed to be fully aware that this man had evil intentions because she never backed down. In fact, she kept me behind her and kept backing up, pushing me back. She was not going to let that man get past her. Still, the guy cautiously made a couple more steps. Around this time, my parents looked out the window to see where Annie went. Of course, they see the whole scene out in the yard and freak out. They ran out the door screaming. I just remember being so confused with everything going on. The strange man, the neighbor's loud mower, Annie looking crazy, and my parents running and screaming are all strange. When the strange man saw my parents coming, he ran back to his car and gunned it down the street. I vaguely remember seeing the stranger's map flying in the air as my dad threw me over his shoulder and ran back towards the house. So yeah, it seems like this dude was totally trying to abduct me and my dog saved my life. Like, it's crazy to think what could have happened. Annie was an incredibly good girl that we had till I was 17. In my previous posts, I talked about the man that tried to take my sister off our front lawn. To recap, a year and a half ago, my adopted mother called me one day to go pick my little sister after she got on the wrong bus. When I got there, I found a strange man talking to her. I scared him off, but over the next few months, weird things kept happening around our yard. Finally, one of Rosie's coats disappeared and was returned hours later, with all the tears and rips fixed. After what seemed like months of asking the police for help, they said if anything else happened, they'd come over right away. That brings us to barely 24 hours later. It was a Saturday night and Claire was supposed to go out with Diane for dinner, a movie, and maybe some dancing. I was supposed to go out with my own girlfriend, and a neighborhood kid was supposed to watch all 4 kids. Diane's 2 and Claire's 2. The girl was like 14 and her parents lived 2 doors down and would be home all night. All of us were really unsure about it, and after much deliberation, I insisted that I'd be the one to stay home, and my girlfriend would come over to help. Keep me company, shall we say. Fast forward a few hours later, the kids had just eaten dinner and the ladies were ready to go out. I was inside getting dinner ready for me and my girlfriend. and they just left as she came up our driveway. I thanked her for changing her plans, and she let herself in. Bit of backstory on my girlfriend Tara. She's 19, but very tall and very thin. When she gets dressed up, she can look late 20s and be absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. However, when she's dressed down in sweats and a tank top, that probably won't stay on through the night. She's lucky to pass for legal to drive. That's a small detail that becomes important. So, we had a good night hanging out around the kids. The boys, David and Sam, are absolutely nuts over her and have been trying to steal her from me since they first met Tara. They don't leave her lap throughout the whole movie, and the girls, Rosie and Kaylee, wouldn't leave mine. Everything went smoothly, even bedtime, and before long all four of us are fast asleep, leaving us to finally go downstairs to enjoy our date. We have a romantic candlelight dinner a few hours late, but that didn't matter. Put on a movie that neither one of us paid any attention to and fell asleep on each other. It's nearly midnight when I hear the screaming. Flinging myself off the couch and out from underneath a very startled Tara, I take the stairs by the twos and end up in Rosie's room where she and Kaylee are in the bottom bunk shrieking. Both girls practically jump into my arms, nearly hysterical, and neither one can make any sense until I see Rosie pointing out the window. I feel Tara behind me and pass my girls off to her before turning off the light and looking out the window. He's there, standing out there in our front yard, staring up into Rosie's room at the top bunk where she had just been sleeping. My heart stops and I duck down before he can see me, my voice practically hissing as I tell Tara to take the girls into David's room, lock the door and call the police. I make sure they're in there before I check the window again and they're gone. Nowhere to be seen. My heart starts racing at this point and I double check the door. As I hear Tara on the phone with the police, the sound of the front door jiggling breaks me from concentration. I move to the stairs and watch from the windows as he moves from the front door to the back, trying each point of access he can find before turning back to the front yard. At this point, I'm set off like crazy. Not only am I kind of anxious for myself, but I also have Rosie upstairs who's already been traumatized by this guy. 3 other kids who are now awake and scared, and my girlfriend. 5 people I do absolutely anything to protect. Seeing him continue to try to each window and door, I panic as I realize he can get into our garage again, and that's where we keep our sports equipment, like baseball bats and hockey sticks. Things that could be used to break open windows. When I hear the garage door start to open, I lose it. The next thing I remember is the police showing up and Tara pulling me off the guy before the cops take him to the ground. As they get him in the back of the squad car, he's screaming and cussing at me. Tara fills me in that after she heard the front door slam open and she ran downstairs after me, and found me having tried to drag the man to the ground, the 2 of us throwing punches as I was screaming for him to never come near my family again. When they finally get him under control and come to talk to me, they explained that the reason they got there so quickly was that they had been in the area checking in on things, when they found an abandoned car on the other side of the forest, directly across from where the forest ends beside our place. They found it suspicious and checked the car only to find kids' toys and pictures. When they got Tara's call, they knew the 2 were connected. When the 2 mothers got home, they revealed that the pictures they had found were of Rosie. Dozens of pictures on various days and in various places. The back seat was full of toys for a little girl and the trunk had clothes and blankets. When he finally confessed, he told the police that he'd been watching her for months before he even tried to take her off the lawn, that he was stopped by me, and that when he saw her mother go out and what he thought was a young teenage babysitter come over, my girlfriend Tara, he planned on breaking in to take her. He never really explained why, other than he wanted her, but he ended up getting charged with stalking a minor and misconduct. So the creepy guy that not only tried to take my little sister off the curb, but also stalked her for months and was going to break into our home to take her, doing who knows what to the babysitter and the other kids in order to do that. We've met more than I ever wanted to, and if I ever see you near her or the others again, I'll finish what my girlfriend stopped me from doing. Background. I immigrated to a small town, around 20,000 in the northeastern US, a little over a year ago from Australia. There are a handful of people of my nationality here, but we are pretty few and far between. I work in a job where I have a little bit of profile in the community. That's somewhat relevant. A few weeks ago at work, I saw this message in my Facebook other inbox, the one where messages from people I'm not friends with go. It's obviously from a dude in the area based on the limited information I can read on his profile, so I figured it was some random person who'd seen my work, found me on Facebook and wanted to drop me a line. It happens every now and then, so I wasn't terribly fazed. It read, "Hello, how are you? I've been to Australia 3 times for a total of 1.5 years. I lived in this city and here, and I went back in 93 and 2014. Please put in a friend request." I couldn't figure out how to do it from my end, as there was no option. "Hope to hear from you. Thanks, Phil." Later that night, I get home from work and I'm having dinner with my girlfriend who owns a bar I work weekends at. She starts dying laughing and says, "Oh shit, I forgot to tell you. And you're going to kill me." My first customer today wanders in, and already I can tell he's a bit weird. He asked for a beer and I give him one. And then he asked me what age ranges of women come in here. I tell him like 25 plus, he says. That's my age range. I'm 44 and keep rambling on to her. Somehow he gets to the topic of Australia and how he's been there a few times. She says, "Oh, my boyfriend is that nationality actually." And I cut her dead off with, "Wait, is his name Phil?" She falls about laughing and is like, "Yup." I yelled, "F me, man." Apparently, he spent a good hour showing off his knowledge of my country's slang terms and geographical tidbits before asking where I lived. No, where exactly does she live? Like what street? What my full name was, and whether I worked there. He told her that he loves people of my nationality and that he's a state certified guide so he could take me out canoeing or hiking or whatever. Yeah, like I'm gonna frickin' do that in the woods with a strange dude who tracked me down over Facebook just because I'm from a country he loves. He goes back into the bar 2 nights later, a Friday night, and my girlfriend texts me saying that he asked her whether he got my full name right because he sent me a Facebook message and he never responded. He then proceeded to repeat his repertoire of my country's lingo and told a handful of off-color jokes, offending at least one female bar patron. He said that he would be back the following night to see me. A snowstorm that weekend meant I dodged the bullet that Saturday night, but the following weekend he walked in the door of the bar as I was seating a couple of customers. I give him a token. "How's it going?" And he launches straight into, "Are you the nationality guy?" "Shit. Well, I'm one of them," I said. He perches himself right on a bar stool in front of me, orders a beer, and proceeds to talk nonstop. Rattles off all the places he's been. Countless random trivia facts about my country. Do you know how much total area the continent consists of? And stuff like that. And all of the places he wanted to visit. He wasn't just intense and creepy, he had absolutely no situational awareness. It was a busy Saturday night in a bar. I'm the only bartender and I'm running around the room serving people, but he wouldn't stop talking at me the entire time. Thankfully, the girl sitting next to him was also not from around here. Colombian, I think, and he got distracted talking to her about taking her out into the woods. Eventually, he asked for his check, pointedly showed me the tip line and asked me if it was enough. It wasn't, but please screw off anyway, and left. Although initially my girlfriend had thought it was funny and that he was bent on meeting me, she quickly became creeped out by his behavior too. I managed to avoid him for a week or two after that. Until one Friday afternoon when the girlfriend and I were having a quick lunch at the pub before I went into the office. We sat at a table next to the main bar, and who should cut his conversation with the bartender, whom we know, in mid-sentence, turn around and stride over. "Your friendly neighborhood creep. I've got something to show you," he said, as he rummaged in the pocket of his jeans before pulling out a large handful of loose change. My country's change. Yeah, I've seen Australia's currency before. Do you actually carry that around with you all the time?" "Well, I love Australia." Yeah, that much is evident. He again gave me this shtick about how he wants to visit this city and that city. For the 3rd time I've heard it now, and again failed to recognize my half-turns away, ignoring him body language. Mercifully, the bartender came over to take our order, and Phil left to pay his tab. The bartender brought over a slip of paper Phil had written his information on, in case anybody was interested in going out in the woods for outdoor activities. It was like something they'd find in Ted Bundy's Personal Effects. The handwriting and general layout of this note made me immediately and genuinely question this guy's grip on reality. He leaves and I breathe an audible sigh of relief. We start talking to the bartender about our other weird interactions with the guy. And of course, who should return quietly, probably hearing everything in the process because he left his coat on the coat rack. He showed up at the bar again later that night while I was at the office, and told my girlfriend that he's also a profession that involves being around children. Ugh, want to know the best day of my life? He asked her. He said he was asked to speak to an audience of students at an all-girls private school one time when he was in Australia in his 30s. Afterwards, he said he slept with one of the seniors. Somehow I didn't ask for further details. I haven't seen him since, thankfully, but he cropped up elsewhere in what I hope is a small world. Small town coincidence. I had relayed this story to a coworker last Friday after she told me a similar story about being harassed by a weirdo that she talked to on a dating website. Today she says, I think the stalker outdoor guide who's following you around contacted me on a dating site. Sure enough, I look at his profile and it's him. No question. She takes a bunch of screenshots of what I can gather is his About Me section and texts them to me. They are the ramblings of a madman. I'd post the screenshots, but they'd probably give him away, and I don't want to bear the wrath. Every summer of my childhood, my whole family would travel to stay at my grandparents' home in a small town in Ohio. They didn't have a big house, so all 4 of us girls had to share a room, with me and my oldest cousin in one bed and my 2 middle cousins in the other. It was incredibly cramped, so we would try to stay outside as much as possible, attempting to find something to do. This particular summer I was 9 and my cousins were 12, 13, and 16. It was the late 90s and we were bored out of our minds. So when the oldest said that she was taking a walk, we all begged to come along. I knew she was only taking a walk though so she could sneak out to smoke, but I didn't care. I just wanted out of the house. We'd usually walk for about a mile, go to McDonald's or a drugstore for snacks, then turn around and go home. It was evening and we were on our way back. I was getting bored, the novelty of leaving the house having worn off. The 2 middle girls were walking ahead, talking about boy bands, and the oldest was hanging behind, trying to hide the fact that she was smoking. Suddenly, I noticed a man with a dog about half a block behind us. I was so excited and hoped that he would get close enough that I could pet the dog. Sure enough, he starts getting closer. I didn't think the oldest was paying attention and the middle girls were way ahead, so I figured I could stay behind a bit and play with the dog. I start to walk toward the dog when my cousin grabs me and pulls me close. Don't, she whispers. He has a knife, just keep walking. I glanced behind us and sure enough, the man is holding a knife. He didn't say anything. He just kept following and staring at us. I had no idea that she was paying attention, let alone closely enough to notice the knife, but I'm glad she was. My cousin took me by the hand and hurried me home, trying to put as much space as possible between us and the man. We finally got home and ran inside. Thankfully, we never found out what he was going to use the knife for and we never saw him again. We also never walked after dark again. All of us are mothers now, and the idea of our kids being in this situation is terrifying. We try not to be helicopter moms, but we always try to have at least one of us with the kids and make sure the kids know the importance of being aware of their surroundings. There can be very scary people even in areas that feel safe. Oh, and my cousin quit smoking and got really into healthy living, so that's good too. I'm not sure if this is the right subreddit for this, but I for sure hope to never meet this POS again. This happened to me in high school when I was in 11th grade. I was 16 years old. The street I lived in was in New York City, and it was a pretty small street, so you could hear anything that happened at each end of it. You can hear kids laughing, kids falling from bikes, etc. This is an important detail for the story. Another important one is the house I lived in only had one front entrance to get into. The front entrance had 2 doors, a screen door, which was the first thing an outsider would see when they approached my house, and a wooden door. Both had locks, so nobody could just open the screen door unless they had a key. I note this due to all the videos I watched online of people just yanking screen doors open. I was living alone for a month and it was pretty fun and mundane. My parents were living in California at the time due to work. One day, while I was on my computer doing something, there were these strong knocks on the screen's front door. I left my room and approached the front wooden door cautiously. I'm an easily anxious person and it does not help that I keep watching crime documentary videos. The person on the other side knocked on my screen door again. I peered through the peephole of the wooden door and could see that this white middle-aged dude just standing there, moving his head side to side, and his body was doing those jumpy movements that people do when they are standing and waiting. I decided to open the wooden door a little bit, thinking the screen front door was going to protect me anyway, and asked him, "What's wrong?" The guy instantly responded, "There's been a car crash. Please come out here and help me. A kid that was riding his bike was run over." I asked, "Where is the car crash?" The guy responded, "Down the street over there." He pointed to one of the ends of the street. Remember how I said the street was small and I could hear anything? Even a kid falling from his bike, so I sure as heck could have been able to hear a freaking crash. The second he said that, my guard immediately went up, and while I was quite scared, I was also mad for some reason. "Call the police. I don't know why you're coming to me." The guy pushed on with what he was saying before and asked me to come out to see the car crash with him and to see if there's anything we could do to help. I remember saying, "Call 911 or I will. They'll be able to handle this much better than I can." I then closed the wooden door and locked it. If you're wondering, I didn't call the police. I just went to my room and watched YouTube videos. I know it's a weird thing to do, but I was trying to calm myself down because at that point my heart was beating so fast. I kept looking at the time. I forgot what specific time it was, but I remember it being in the afternoon. The sky was bright blue at least. I waited for a few hours when I was sure the guy would be gone. I went back to the front entrance and opened the wooden door, made sure nobody was there, and opened the screen door to see the car crash at the end of the street. Why did I do this? I wanted to truly make sure that there was no car crash. I know I said I would have heard it, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring an actual thing that I just happened to not hear. There was nothing there. No kid and no crashed car. Just the usual street end that I'm used to. At that time, I felt a sense of relief. It was only a few years later when I thought about this moment again and realized that God may have had some malicious intention for me. Good thing I kept myself level-headed and realized that there's no way there could have been a crash without me hearing. Who knows what the heck would have happened? I'm still relatively new to Reddit, so I don't really know too much about it. I am a fan of YouTube videos though. When I'm doing things around the house, I like to listen to readings on YouTube of Reddit stories, both hilarious and terrifying ones. One day, as I was cleaning, a video I was listening to finished and automatically played the next one, which was a stalker story reading. After hearing other people's encounters, I decided that maybe I'm ready to share one of mine too. I posted a story of mine earlier and I got a lot of positive reinforcement, so I think that I want to post another one. This is an encounter that went on over the span of maybe a month, then continued on from a distance for the next 2 years. This is a pretty long story, so I'm sorry if it gets boring. Growing up, I lived in a really small town. I don't mean footloose small. With a mere 14,000 people, I mean really small, with only 1,000 people when I moved here in the first grade. I didn't make any close friends all throughout my school days and wanted to get pretty far away. The farthest my parents would let me go for school, though, was a few states over to study Japanese at a private university in Ohio. My freshman year flew by. I met a ton of new people, and my Facebook exploded with friend requests from both domestic and international students alike. Not remembering everyone I met, I accepted them all. I was young and excited to make new friends. I ended up making a lot of good ones. I was actually kind of, dare I say it, popular. By my second year, the leader of my department had deemed me the big sister of the program. It was a small program, but I was usually the one that people would turn to for help. I was good at what I was studying and I was proud. There was a building on campus that was open 24 hours for students. It had couches, armchairs, and coffee tables on one half and tables and regular chairs on the other, separated by a big fireplace. There was also 2 little secluded loft areas for small groups that wanted a little more privacy. People would go there to study or even to just hang out with friends. There was a cafe attached to it, so it made it ideal for a study spot. Coffee plus students equal productiveness. Because I am a coffee fanatic, Some might say coffee snob. I was always in the study building where I had access to coffee when I wasn't in class or catching those oh so rare hours to sleep. The only problem, well, if you can call it a problem, was that because I was the go-to person for the program, I would only sit down for a few minutes before somebody would come up and sit with me, be it to study or to chat. Usually the latter. When the end of sophomore year was rolling around, the dreaded exam time was approaching quickly. I was studying abroad my junior year and wanted to leave my school on a positive note. I was desperately trying to get some studying done, but people kept stopping to chat with me in the study building. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining like, oh wow, I'm so popular I can't even stand it. No, I loved my friends, but they couldn't really grasp the concept of silent studying. A few of them were already done with exams and just wanted to talk. I decided to try my luck in the library. Instead of heading to the story building, I went to the library and sat down at one of the little tables by a big window. I was on a roll. I had gotten through quite a few big projects and finished writing one of my presentations. I sat up a little straighter and stretched out my arms in front of me, letting out a satisfied sigh. A voice from behind me suddenly said, "Working hard?" The library wasn't a popular space to study. Everyone usually went to the study building or got some private rooms on the other side of the building, so the sudden voice behind me made me jump a bit. Yeah, I replied. He was a Chinese guy on the heavier side, a few inches taller than me. Sorry, do I know you? Now, I don't remember his name, so for this story, I'll just call him Chen. Yeah, we met at orientation. We are friends on Facebook, he said. His English was good, but sometimes his accent was hard to understand. He still didn't give me his name, but he looked at me so expectantly that I felt bad for not remembering him. Oh yeah, I blurted out. It's nice to see you. How are finals going? We talked a little bit about school and some other small talk. It was getting late though, so I excused myself to go back to my shared house for the evening. The next day, I avoided the study building again, hoping to get the same amount of studying done that I had the day before. I walked quietly into the hall, glancing around. I didn't see Chen, so I went to my table from the day before and sat down. It wasn't 15 minutes before he appeared though, sitting down next to me and trying to strike up a convo. I was a little bit annoyed, but I stayed polite. I excused myself after about an hour of awkward conversation with the stranger and gave up for the evening. It was still early, but I grabbed some friends and we went out for dinner at a local diner. The next day, I decided to try again. I went into the library and, much to my dismay, I saw him sitting at my favorite table. At first I was annoyed, but then I thought, wait a second, he is here first, so I can just grab a different table and he won't notice. I walked to the other side of the room, passing rows and rows of bookshelves, and sat down at a corner table. If he found me, it would have to be because he was actively looking. About an hour later, I heard footsteps heading around the quiet room. Then a quickened pace headed straight for me. Hey. I groaned internally, but put on a polite smile. Hey there. He had brought his stuff and sat down across from me. After a painful half hour, I finally gave up and decided to head home. The next day, I decided to talk to the front desk about getting a private room. They were on a different floor, so surely I'd be safe there. Nope, he found me. After knocking repeatedly on the door and staring at me, I could no longer pretend that I didn't see him or hear him, even with my headphones on. If I waited much longer, I'm sure the other people in the area would be just as annoyed as I am, so I didn't want to ruin their study time. I opened the door. Oh hey, I was actually just getting ready to leave. I lied. So soon? I was hoping you could check my English paper. Ah man, way to make me feel guilty. Well, I could spare a few. Cool. He pushed his way in, sitting down at the table. Sighing, I sat back down and took his paper. As I started checking it, he started talking about how he had never shared a meal with a girl before because he thinks it's such an intimate thing. I was checking his paper as quickly as I could, trying to get away from the awkward encounter, so I let out the occasional, and head nod, barely listening. Suddenly, he starts pulling food out of his bag from a nearby Chinese restaurant and hands me a fork. I'm sitting there thinking, wait, what? He just said he thinks sharing food with a girl is intimate. Luckily, I was able to form words. Your paper looks good. I don't see any real English mistakes. I can't stay though. I have plans to eat dinner with some friends. Sorry. I passed him his paper, stood up and left, slightly creeped out. I would have blamed it on cultural differences, but I knew a ton of other Chinese kids on campus and none of them were as weird as Chen. In fact, I was close to a lot of the other Chinese kids because they were so cool. But Chen was giving off some really scary vibes and I didn't want to see him again. The next day, I decided it would be better to just study at the study building. I'd rather be surrounded by chatterbox friends than alone with a creepy stranger. The loft was open when I arrived. You have to climb stairs to get to it, and you can't really tell if anyone was up there, let alone who, unless you are really trying to look up through the cracks or go halfway up the stairs. Practically giddy with joy, I rush up the stairs and settle into the armchair with a cup of coffee from the cafe. The giddiness of finding the loft open quickly wore off, though, as I went into the productive mode. I got a lot of studying done, but after about 2 hours, movement downstairs caught my eye. Chen was walking around, looking around the open floor. I took a deep, quiet breath and tried to push the paranoia down. No big deal, right? Maybe he was just tired of the library and wanted to study in this building for a change, for the first time in 2 years. Then I heard it. Those awful words. He was asking a group of people I knew if they'd seen me, asking about me by name. Luckily, they arrived after me and didn't see me go up into the loft. I was safe. He looked around a little bit more and finally left. The next day, I promised a Japanese friend of mine that I'd help him with his paper. My friend was a 6.5 foot tall, ripped like a quarterback phenomenon of a man named Tetsuo. We agreed to meet in the loft at a set time, and I arrived a bit early to make sure that we could actually get the loft since they were a bit popular. I was sitting in the armchair when I heard him start coming up the stairs. He was 15 minutes early. How very Japanese, I thought jokingly. My heart dropped when I looked up, though. Not Tetsuo. Chen. He silently stalked over to the sofa, dropped his things, and sat on the coffee table in front of me. He put a hand on each of the arms of the chair, locking me in, and proceeded to forcefully kiss me. He was bigger than me in both height and weight, so it took a lot to push him off me. I'm sure that the rush of adrenaline helped. "What are you doing?" I shrieked. "I'm in love with you. I want to be with you, and I want you to marry me and move back to China with me and start a family with me." He started to lean in again. I leaned back and tried to push him away. "Get away from me." He leaned back a little, but kept his hands on the arms of the chair and his knees on either side of mine, locking me in so I couldn't get away. "What's wrong?" What's wrong? Did he really just ask me that? Was he stupid as well as crazy? "You." "No. Just no. Get away from me." I tried to wiggle free, but he was stronger than me. "I don't even know you." "But I know you," he said. "I need you and I love you." I was about to scream for help when Tetsuo came pounding up the stairs in a rush. Chen may have been bigger than me, but Tetsuo was way bigger than Chen. He looked right at me, asking me in Japanese, "Are you okay?" I replied in Japanese, saying, "Help me." He started walking towards us, and Chen immediately leant back and let me go. Tetsuo took my hand, pulling me to sit on the sofa right next to him, saying in English, "You promised to help me with my English paper." I was shaking, but I felt significantly safer with Tetsuo there to help me. He could easily take down Chen if it came to that. Chen didn't leave. He sat in the armchair I had just vacated and waited. Did he think that Tetsuo would just leave and he could continue to harass me? We finished Tetsuo's paper in about an hour. I took my time explaining certain grammar points and spelling patterns, hoping that we could take long enough and Chen would give up and go away. But he didn't. Tetsuo got up and stood between my stalker and me. "Let's get some dinner." He picked up my stuff, took my hand, and pulled me down the stairs without a second glance at Chen. We didn't get dinner. For obvious reasons, I didn't have an appetite. Tetsuo did walk me home though, and I told him all about Chen. He said that until finals were over and until I left the university to go home for the summer, he would act as my bodyguard. He said he would take me to all my classes and stay with me outside of class. He was true to his word, but Chen always was within view. The day of my last exam and the day I was leaving, I met with Tetsuo in the study building. We looked around and didn't see Chen. With that, I said I was going to buy a coffee from the cafe. Upon entering the cafe, I rushed to the counter and ordered my usual, a medium black coffee. My blood turned to ice as a voice behind me said, "Make it a large one on me." Chen. He was always hidden in the cafe, knowing that I would be going there for my coffee like always. "Nah," I told the woman behind the counter. "My usual medium, please. I'll be paying for it myself, too." "Let me," he insisted. There was a little bit of back and forth between us. Thinking that we were a couple or something, the woman behind the counter smiled and said, Just let the guy get you a cup of coffee." I begrudgingly agreed and rushed away as soon as it was in my hand. He was still paying. He caught up to me before I could reach Tetsuo, though. So close. There was a pillar in the way, though, so Tetsuo couldn't see me. Every time I tried to move, Chen stepped into my path and stopped me. He began begging again. Marriage, family, China. No, no, and no. Tetsuo realized I was taking too long and came to rescue me, telling Chen to stay away from me. As we were walking away, Chen said, "I won't give up. Not ever. Not even if you marry someone else." I took my last exam and moved back to Illinois that evening. I did find Chen on my Facebook and blocked him. It wasn't hard to locate him after he started liking all my photos. I studied abroad in Japan for a year and had to go back for my uni for senior year. I had a boyfriend then who is now my husband. A friend and I rented a house just off campus, but the internet wasn't going to be set up for another few days, so I went to use the free Wi-Fi at the study building. While I was talking to my boyfriend, who was still in Japan, Chen appeared in front of me. He immediately began trying to talk to me, then noticed I was talking on the phone and decided to stand there silently staring and waiting. My blood went cold again and I began to panic, telling my boyfriend in Japanese what was happening. I told him about Chen while we were in Japan. He told me to run away or to find somebody nearby to help. Instead, the anger in me began to rise. I wasn't some pitiful little girl that needed help whenever something happened. When I was in Japan, I had experiences that demanded I stand up for myself, and this time wasn't any different. I looked at him and said, "I'm talking to my boyfriend, please leave me alone." He stood there staring at me for what felt like hours, though I'm sure it was only a few moments. After narrowing his eyes and glaring at my phone, he walked away. I managed to avoid him for most of the year, but I always saw him lurking nearby, staring. Because I was almost always surrounded by friends, though, he never dared to come near and beg for marriage again. He tried to approach me more than once when I was alone, but I made it clear to him that I would scream if he touched me. I kept to public places and made sure to never ever be in an empty place. I think it helped that Tetsuo was usually by my side too. I live in Japan now with my husband. It's been 3 years since I graduated and I haven't seen or heard from Chen since. I have lived in New York City all of my life, but this ranks as one of my oddest encounters. I probably owe my life to somebody I only met briefly. It was about 30 years ago and I was coming out of my dentist's, who was located on a desolate side street between Penn Station and 7th Avenue, not far from Macy's Herald Square. At about 6:30 p.m. my dental work finished and the sun was just starting to set. I walked out of the appointment only to run into a man who repeatedly intentionally body slammed me while pretending it was an accident. I had formed an intention to say nothing, but to slowly edge my way closer and closer to the open door of the chock full of nuts and make a quick dash for the entrance. Again and again the man said, "Excuse me, miss," and slammed into me from the street side as I tried to pick my way across the sidewalk to the open door. He must have stepped back and hit me 6 or 8 times when, out of nowhere, a large man stepped forward and said, "Miss, where are you going?" Terrified that they were a tag team, I said, "I'm trying to make my way to the 6th Avenue subway entry at Macy's." This mysterious guy grabbed me and propelled me so quickly the couple of blocks to the subway that my feet didn't touch the ground, even though I was a young woman of large size and a former distance runner who would move with great speed. The mysterious man took me right to the train, then disappeared. My dad said he was probably a plainclothes cop. I never knew who he was or what the other guy was trying to pull, but I will always be grateful for having been saved from something quite potentially bad. I've been lurking on this page for the last 2 years, but I've always been too scared to tell my story. Funnily enough, I stumbled across this thread by complete accident just after my encounter, while looking for a way to rationalize or come to terms with myself over what happened. I've had some creepy encounters in my time, but I've never had something as full-blown as this. This experience single-handedly put my life on hold and gave me a whole range of stress and anxiety. Throwaway account to protect my own identity, as well as being a first-time poster. This happened approximately 2 years ago. I was around 18 and I had been moving houses quite a lot before I finally moved into my current house and also the house these events take place in. I was working at some shitty commission-only job in the city while living in the area of my city known to be extremely rough around the edges and for its high crime rates. A few people in my town drive beautiful sports cars, despite living in crappy houses, and I fell in love with the gold one that I was constantly seeing around the streets. I can't exactly pinpoint exactly where it started, but one day I was leaving my town's shopping center, probably picking up pet food or munchies. Sounds about right, to be honest, when I picked up on a car driving erratically behind me, swerving through multiple lanes of traffic to keep up with me and trying to get my attention. The car was full of men aged 20 to 30, and once they realized I had seen them, They were ecstatic. I passed it off as boys being boys and just some odd cat call, and I turned into a side street so as not to lure them to my house. I was new to the area and didn't realize I turned into a dead-end street that linked back around to the road I was on, and to my annoyance, these guys followed. Not wanting to delay getting home, I decided to just speed like a maniac to my street, pull a U-turn in the side street next to my house, small cars for the win, quickly pull into my driveway, and park the car behind my house and out of view from the street. Satisfied, I took my keys out of the car and walked around to the front door. I remember being a naive idiot, smirking to myself while noticing this car full of guys hadn't made the U-turn in time and were now driving slowly up and down my street looking for me. I felt like a complete badass and went inside. But here's where the creepiness begins. It was about a month or two after that encounter, and to get to work and avoid traffic, I was catching the train to the city, which was right near my house. One day in the afternoon, while coming home from work, there was a semi-trailer driving down the road. Something not uncommon, as my street was off a major road between two towns, and we were constantly upgrading the road. The driver of the truck half leant out the window and started catcalling me. I, being young, just decided to smile at this guy instead, hoping he'd just have a laugh and keep driving. Well, I was wrong. The guy instead turns off his truck and starts running towards me on the street. I had huge headphones in and didn't notice until he tapped me on the shoulder and offered me a cold energy drink. It was the middle of summer and still light outside on the main road. Thinking this guy posed no major threat, I accepted this drink and made small talk. For the life of me, I can't remember if I accidentally slipped up and revealed minor things that could reveal where I lived or even my name. I remember he kept bugging me for a phone number, so I finally just gave up and gave him my actual number, but with a digit changed on the end. This always worked in the past, and I just wanted to go home and chill out. The guy eventually hopped back in his truck and drove off. I remember smiling, thinking how awesome it was that I got a free drink, and then I got a little paranoid thinking that he bugged the can with a tracking device or something. I laughed it off, thinking of how stupid that was, posted the drink on my public Instagram, and went on with my day. A few weeks later, and there were some tradespeople working on my street. They'd occasionally catcall and come up with stupid one-liners that I'd post on my Facebook, laughing with my friends about how forward and amusing they were. I don't know if they were related, but after my experience, anything is possible. I was smoking up quite regularly around this point, and I started to feel paranoid in my home. At first, I brushed it off as a minor side effect of the weed. However, I couldn't quite shake the feeling of being watched. I started to receive phone calls from private numbers that wouldn't say anything on the other end. I joked with my friends about a stalker I had leaving cartons of beer on my driveway and switching the sensor lights on in the backyard near my bedroom window. I had a sensor light on my front porch stop working all of a sudden, and I assumed it had just blown out. I felt completely on edge, like I was being watched through the windows. I'd hear footsteps on my front porch when I was in the living room, and at night I would keep waking up for no reason. I'm a heavy sleeper, so it struck me as odd. I spammed calls to my local police station for weeks, telling them I thought somebody was in my backyard or on my front doorstep. However, by the time they would drive out, they'd take a look around the place, find nothing, see my red eyes, and just assume that I was another paranoid user. Eventually, my cat started acting strange. She started hissing and jumping at my bedroom window, running around the house and howling. I thought she was just seeing a neighborhood cat in the window and banging her tail on the thin glass, making it sound like knocking. Whenever I locked her out of my bedroom to get some sleep, she'd start wailing and panicking, clawing at my door to be let back in, only to once again slam into the window and keep up with her odd behavior. This started happening every night. One day I came home and my mom was livid. She handed me a note that was left on the front door, blamed my ex-boyfriend. He was an abusive POS and demanded I hand it in and go to the police in person. I took the note to the police. I think it said something like "found you, thought you could hide," or something along those lines, so all signs pointed to my ex. I calmly gave the police my ex's number in the note, and we all laughed about it, and they promised it would stop. It didn't. My friends started to grow concerned, and I told a few of them that I believed it was my ex. A few of my male friends, bless them, made a game out of waiting for my ex to come back to my house so they could take matters into their own hands. They would drive by a few nights to make sure I was okay, and I started sleeping with the lights on. One night, it was 1 a.m. I was awoken up by my cat howling and my phone ringing off the hook. "Get out of your house now. It's not your ex." It was one of my friends. I panicked, grabbed my cat, packed a bag, and sped to my friend's house. That night, everything fell into place. My friends had noticed a man lightly tapping on my window and staring at me around 12:30. The man noticed he was being watched and quickly peeled off in his gold sports car. While I drove to another friend's house to be consoled, my other friends followed this man half across the city, trying to confront him. Eventually, he turned into a block of apartments and ran inside. Spooked out and deciding they didn't have enough manpower or intimidation, they decided to call it a night, call the cops, and come back later to suss the guy out. The next day, the police turned up at the house, did a small look around and left, claiming that there was no evidence and nothing they could do. A few days later, my friends, not accepting this for an answer, decided to come back to the apartment and start looking around. They asked a few neighbors for a guy matching their description, and while they did know the man, he wasn't very sociable and his car had apparently not been around for a few days. A week later, I received a box of items on my front doorstep and my heart sank. There were photos, dozens of them of me at work, in my house, sleeping, catching the train. Photos of my friends, photos that I didn't even know how they were taken. A small book containing Tumblr, YouTube, and Instagram addresses, my hobbies, where I worked, etc. The most concerning of all was the light bulb to my front porch and some underwear that had gone missing from my clothesline, all neatly piled together in this box. And then it just stopped after that. I never received anything else, and my friends watched my house for a few weeks and saw nothing. The scariest thing is I can never put a face to a name, and I constantly live on the edge of whether or not this will happen again. Sometimes I have sleepless nights, like tonight where I stay awake listening out for a tap at the window or footsteps on the driveway, but nothing ever happens. I met my boyfriend a month after this happened, and even he can't believe me sometimes and calls me paranoid. It's a horrible feeling to feel unsafe in your own home, but it's an even worse feeling to question your own sanity and never know how this all started. I am getting better slowly, but I will admit I'll probably never be the same openly cheerful person I was before. I browse this sub every night before bed, reading all of your encounters, and I'd also like to thank you all for making me feel somewhat included and secure in the community. Even though I don't post often, I always fall asleep feeling less alienated from the world in some horrible twisted way. I was 13 years old and school had just been let out for the summer. I had a good friend that lived in a nicer area of town, and his parents let me spend weeks at a time staying at their house. He had a neighbor who lived across the street from him that always had broken down cars, TVs, microwaves, and just general clutter in their driveway. There lived a middle-aged woman and a middle-aged man. We hardly saw the man and only saw the woman if she was taking care of the yard. They had a large cornfield to the side of their home that was between their house and my friend's. Anytime you had the misfortune of crossing paths with this lady, she would give you the evilest death glare you could imagine. She would just stare you down until you were out of eyesight. She just gave off really creepy vibes. My friend and I loved to fish, and he had a lake about 2 miles away from his house. To get to the lake, you had to walk down the road in front of the creepy lady's house. We would go fishing 2 to 3 days a week and would spend all day there swimming, fishing, and generally having a good time. One day, we stayed way too late at the lake and found ourselves walking home around 11 p.m. We knew we were in deep shit and began running home. I was a fat kid with asthma at the time, so we had to make multiple stops. Unfortunately, one of these stops was in his neighbor's driveway, leaning up against one of the broken cars. We heard the front door open and the lady pokes her head out and yells, "Get the heck off my property, you little shits." She closes the door and we start fast walking towards his house. We hear the door open again, but this time she has a shotgun in her hands and it is pointed at us. My friend yells, "Gun!" And we both book it and dive into her cornfield army crawling in opposite directions. You could hear her footsteps thumping as she ran for the field. Once she reached it, I could no longer hear anything. No rustling of the corn, just silence. Then out of the blue I heard a gunshot. Boom. Followed by the pumping of the shotgun and another gunshot. You could tell she was just shooting in random directions. I heard some of the shot hitting some of the corn to my right and then to my left. She must have run out of shells because the gunfire stopped. Once I realized that she was out of shots, I stood up and ran faster than I ever had towards my friend's house. He was already there, waiting in the backyard for me. We lay in his grass watching the neighbor weave in and out of the corn looking for us. 20 minutes probably went by and she went back into her house. We knew this because you could hear the door slam. We went into his house and woke his parents up, who were mad since we were so late. We told them the story and they didn't believe us at first. They thought we were making it up. After an hour of attempting to convince them, they finally believed us because they could see how shaken up we were. And since we didn't have our fishing gear anymore, they called the police, who ended up responding extremely quickly. We told them what had happened and they went to talk to the neighbor. Apparently, when they knocked on the door, she was still holding the shotgun and her boyfriend/husband was in the middle of taking a hit off of his meth pipe. They were both arrested and we never saw them again. Shortly, their house was foreclosed on and torn down. A new neighbor built on the land, and they are very lovely people. I'm a 22-year-old female, but this story took place when I was 21. I live in a small town and I work in a pub in the town center. 2 pubs, 2 small shops, and a bank. On my walk home, I walk past one of the shops, which also has a small bus shelter next to it. Buses run every hour-ish, but none run after 8 p.m. After that, it's just residential housing, and then my house near the end of the road. All in all, from my job to my house, it's about an 8-minute walk. My town is usually dead after about 10 p.m. as everything is closed, and I would genuinely say it was relatively safe. Never had a problem with walking home alone. This incident happened on New Year's Eve, going into New Year's Day, so the pubs were open later. I finished my shift at about 1:30 a.m. and I, my boss, my boyfriend, and 2 other coworkers went to the pub next door for a drink before we went home. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I realized what time it was and that I needed to leave. My boyfriend lives on the other side of town, and I wasn't staying at his that night. My boss insisted on driving me home, and I kept insisting that he stay as everybody else was enjoying themselves and talking about the Christmas period that we had at work. Same with my boyfriend. He insisted on walking me home, but I was adamant that I was fine, and it was less than 10 minutes. Anyways, after a lot of pushback, I told him I was walking home. I really enjoyed walking without headphones and having a cigarette, especially after a shift, because it genuinely is so silent and peaceful. I didn't pass or see anybody until I got to walking past the shop. Like I mentioned previously, there is a small bus shelter next to it, and as I got closer, I realized there was a man sitting on the bench in the bus stop. Bear in mind, it is nearly 3 a.m. and even the pub we were at wasn't actually open anymore. They just let us in because we worked at the other pub. I didn't really think much of the man, but as I got closer, I realized I had served him at my shift earlier on in the night. He looked up as I was walking and I realized he was sniffing some sort of drug, most likely cocaine, from his keys. I didn't actually know who he was and I still don't, but he didn't seem threatening. He looked like he was kind of just chilling. Probably not the best choice of words though, I guess. He did meet my eyes, and I was actually walking past the bus shelter. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry, darling, do you have a lighter I can borrow?" I was smoking as I was walking, so he knew I would have one. I stopped, and he was already walking towards me as I had, so I started digging one of the many lighters I had out of my bag. I was fully intent on just letting him keep it. I am not the type to stand with a 30-something-year-old man while he is lighting a cigarette. Then, he asked me for a cigarette, but I had lit my last one, which I said. During this whole interaction, he was very close to me, but I was kind of frozen in place. I'd realized that I'd stopped and was standing with a man in a dead-end street where nobody was around. I was still in the part of town where there isn't housing for another couple of minutes, and if anyone had come out of the pub, I was too far away where they wouldn't have seen me. I just started mumbling something like, "Keep the lighter, I've got to go." But this man, who I had spoken to for about 20 seconds, told me to just stop for a second. and where my feet had started to turn to walk away, I stopped again. Side note, I know I should have just walked away, but I thought maybe it was innocent enough and I didn't want to give him a reason to provoke him if I just walked away from him. This time his demeanor switched and he wasn't very polite to start with, but it's like him telling me to stop made him realize that I was a young woman walking alone at this time of night. I genuinely get the chills thinking about what he said. He looked me up and down and said the following: "You know, I've been really angry and I've been waiting for someone to hurt all night. You shouldn't be walking around here alone." My legs literally turned to jelly in that moment. I didn't even know if my phone was in my pocket or in my bag. I looked around and then said, "I'm not alone. My boyfriend is waiting for me around the corner. I'll be with him in a minute," and smiled. Just a barefaced lie. My boyfriend was still in the pub and had no clue that this interaction was going on. I thought maybe I should walk back on myself and go back to the pub, but I just decided not to. My house was closer. The man smirked as if he knew I was talking absolute BS and said that he would walk with me to meet my boyfriend. There was no boyfriend waiting for me around the corner. I kept saying there was no need, but he was on my tail, rambling about how I don't understand him, I don't get it, and that I need to walk with him and he isn't going to hurt me. And this whole time I kept thinking that he was going to grab my hair or pull me to the ground, and that any minute he was going to realize there was no boyfriend waiting. I ended up pulling my phone out of my pocket and it opened to our work group chat, and I just typed a message about a man walking with me, realizing my phone was on 2% and thinking that I just wanted someone to know what was happening. I didn't dare to go call my boyfriend. This guy started mumbling about how I wasn't listening to him, and by some miracle, when we turned around the corner onto my street, this guy didn't realize my boyfriend wasn't there. Or maybe he did, but he didn't say anything. He did up his behavior though and started spewing the most perverted stuff to me, saying about how I was a pretty young girl and "I bet your boyfriend doesn't know how to handle you." The whole time I wasn't speaking, just speeding up and checking my phone discreetly. I realized that he was going to know where my house was, so I just thought I'm going to have to pretend one of these houses is mine. Otherwise, I will be leading him right to my house where my dad would be asleep at the back of the house. None the wiser. All of the houses on the street had a small gate and footpath leading to the door. So I chose a house with the light on and opened their gate. I turned to the guy and said, "This is me. See ya. Thanks for walking me," closing the gate behind me. I ran up to their door and shoved my key into the door that was not mine and hoped that this guy would leave and wouldn't wait for me to go inside the house. Thankfully he didn't, and he started stumbling in the opposite direction, back down the street away from where my actual house was. In what I thought was my only chance, I opened this gate and sprinted home. This guy clocked what I was doing instantly and started walking in my direction. By the time I got to my house, he had either not caught up quick enough or had given up. When I put my key in the door, I realized my dad had left his in the door internally, meaning I was locked out. I get my phone out and realize it had died in the time we were talking, so I just started banging on the door and my dad let me in after a couple of minutes. And that was it, but it was absolutely terrifying. I have not walked home alone since, and my boyfriend was so upset that he didn't push more and let him walk me home. Thankfully, I am okay and nothing physical happened to me. I'm a 14-year-old girl and I, like the majority of teenagers, enjoy being home alone. My dad works from home, so very rarely does this happen, but when the opportunity arises, I will take it. One day, both my parents decided to take my brother to chess class and then go shopping in a strip mall nearby. They asked if I wanted to come, but seeing the chance to binge eat Halloween candy and watch Dexter with the sound turned all the way up, I decided to stay home. I do regret it now. They tried to convince me to come, but I don't like going outside. Where are my fellow introverts at? And they left a couple minutes later. I settled in for a few hours of peace with a mountain of Twix and Kit Kats. Fight me, health nuts. And the glory that is Michael C. Hall. I don't know what chemicals those candy people put in this stuff, but I'm not complaining. After a few episodes, the candy was all gone, and all I had left were the shiny wrappers that I would probably sell my soul for, because I have an addiction. I went to throw them out and mourn the loss of the glorious chocolate caramel cookie that is Twix, when I saw that the trash can was near overflowing. It was about 6:30 by now, but dark enough to basically be the middle of the night. I wasn't exactly comfortable to go outside in the dark, especially when the house next to me hasn't had anyone living in it for the past 2 years, which means bank people or whatever are constantly walking around it. However, the garbage bin is right next to the garage door, and I can get outside and back in about 5 seconds, so I decided to risk it. I went outside, threw the trash away, and as I was turning to go back in, I saw a man walking by. This isn't really that uncommon, as I live on a busy street and I live in an upper middle class area, so there's not a whole lot of crime and people go walking at night all the time. I thought it was kind of weird that he was wearing all black, because normally people want to be seen in the dark so they don't get hit by cars, but it didn't seem that strange. He was on his phone and didn't even look up at me, which I was thankful for because I was wearing a nightgown and had my hair a mess. I ran back inside and hit the button that closed the garage door. As it was slowly climbing down, the man raced inside. I was in shock. I stared at him. We made eye contact. He didn't have crazy eyes or anything. He looked perfectly normal. The garage door shut and he smiled wide. I shrieked and slammed the door that led into the garage shut and locked it. He started yelling at me about just wanting to be friends. Yeah, creeper man. I, a teenage girl home alone, will gladly befriend you. A man who just ran into my garage. I called my parents. I probably should have called the police, but I didn't want them to come home and have this strange man jump out and attack them once they got inside. They didn't pick up, of course. I texted them frantically, then called 911, who said they would send out a squad car. The next 10 minutes were probably the most frightening moments of my life. The operator stayed on the phone with me and told me to not go outside in case he had anyone else out there, but I could hear him in the garage. He didn't try to break the door down or anything. Instead, he scratched it and jiggled the doorknob and called for me to open the door, which was probably scarier than if he just tried to break the door down. I heard the garage door open and close, and then the police came. The guy was outside, sitting in front of the garage of the empty house next door. He said he was a landscaper and that he just wanted to talk with me, and that we had spoken before and were friends. I was basically hysterical at this point, and with my sugar adult brain, I couldn't even form coherent sentences. Screw you, chocolate. The cops did arrest him, and my parents came home. They saw that I was alright, and then seemed more concerned about the car that was in the garage than about me. I can't blame them. That car is older than I am and has sentimental value. I'm not going to go out at night ever, and I'm probably never going to be opening the garage door again. This happened back when our family moved to our new house in 2001. I was 8 years old and my sister was 10. Since we had just moved, my mom really wanted some new furniture to make our new home look nice. We weren't well off in the first place, but it was our first real home, meaning it wasn't a cruddy mobile home for once. We drove to a little value furniture shop that had a bunch of things to choose from. Of course, my sister and I, being typical siblings, were joking around with each other. She called me an ugly freak and I told her that her face was fat. Just normal things. Unfortunately, my mom couldn't find anything that she liked, so we left empty-handed. When we got into the car, she wanted to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things, so the trip wasn't a total waste. We drove along. My sister and I noticed a brown car following us, turning every corner, making every light, etc. We pointed it out to my mom and she just blew it off. Don't worry about it, guys. So we dropped it too. We were young and we completely forgot about it when we went to the general store and grabbed our snacks. Again, we got in the car and left for home. And again, the brown car started following us. Mom was getting a bit worried since we lived in another town 20 miles away. She told us it had to be somebody we knew. We had relatives living in the town, not just anyone we were really close to. Like they did before, they copied our route. The closer we were to home, the more paranoid my mother became, and in turn, fueled our fear. She told us to copy the license plate, but tried to assure us that it was probably our cousin Jessica or something. When we parked in our driveway, the car parked behind us, the engine still running. Our mom ordered us to stay in the car while she went to talk with our cousin. My sister and I watched from the rear window as my mom went to speak with her. After a few minutes, we heard the woman from the car yelling, gesturing to us inside the car, and then back to our mother. She peeled out of the driveway, almost running over my mother's feet. A few seconds later, my mom was crying hysterically and ordered us to get into the house. She pushed us into our room and spoke to our dad, even though we could hear everything. Apparently, the woman had thought we were insulting her while we were in the furniture store and threatened us. She had said that she would throw nails in our driveway and poison our dogs outside, and insisted that my mother beat us for talking to a complete stranger in such a way. And if she had the chance, she'd break our little necks if she heard us talking about her again. My dad wasn't very happy that my mom brought her all the way to the house, but stated it probably wasn't a big deal. The next day, my sister and I were walking to our bus stop when we saw the brown car parked across the street from our house. Sis immediately ran back inside to tell our dad, and he walked us to the bus stop and waited until we were safely on the bus. My mom wanted to do something about it, but my dad was against it. He assumed that the police wouldn't do anything since they were just threats. So the creepy, stalkerish behavior continued without interference. She began showing up every morning, watching us as we waited for the bus, but she was coming onto our property to make her presence known. My mom found a bottle of antifreeze near the dog's fenced-in area. It hadn't been opened, but we were told to bring in their bowls every night just in case. Food wrappers and half-empty cups of soda were thrown on our lawn. The air valve caps and lug nuts on our tires went missing on our tires. One of our outside cats died, but we couldn't pinpoint what happened. Then my older brother did something really stupid. My dad was tired of walking us to the bus stop, so he asked my older brother to do it. Spotting the car in its typical spot, he decided the smart thing to do was throw up his middle finger at her. This messed her up. She ran out of her car, cursing and yelling at us. She said that we were crazy and needed to learn our place as children. She was screaming and threatening to beat us and spitting at us. I was crying my eyes out, and my brother had to pick me up because I couldn't move. We stayed home that day, and my mom finally called the police. We gave them her license plate number, and they said they would visit her in a day or two. My mom didn't tell me much, but when they confronted her about it, she went on a total rant about how kids are just dirty bastards and she'd kill every last one she could. They didn't arrest her, but a few days later, the police called my mom to inform us that the lady was admitted to a psych ward. There were no more details, unless my mom didn't want to share them, but we never heard from her again. Somebody on Ask Reddit introduced me to this wonderful sub, and I have a wonderful tale of creepiness to share with you. I'm honestly such a grumpy tomboy. I never imagined that I would end up with a would-be stalker, especially not with the career I chose. I was a forensic death investigator. Forensic police officers that generally work with the DEA's office and/or the medical examiner's office that looks into cases of suspicious death. Occasionally, I'd run into people who had a passing interest in what I did because they'd seen CSI or Law and Order a few times. No big deal, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. It started out with a homicide scene that I'd been called to at a crazy hour in the morning when Mr. Fanboy showed up. He was around his late 30s to early 40s, average height and modestly fit, chatting away with one of the poor unis, guarding the scene. Not a big deal. It happens because people are curious, but then he whips out a camera and snaps a few pictures. At that point, I figured he was a really nosy, tone-deaf journalist and decided to give him a polite lecture on how inappropriate it was to take photos of crime scenes, especially when we were getting ready to move the deceased body. I deleted the pictures, sent him on his way, and figured that I would never see him again. But no, he pops up again a week later at another questionable scene. It doesn't click yet that something is seriously off until a week later, he shows up at another scene, this one being a complete county away from the last one. So I worked a major city in Texas through the medical examiner's office, so we took cases from several surrounding counties, a few thousand square miles. So it was odd that this guy would show up to a rather standard scene on the outer edge of our covered area, even if he was press. I mention it to some coworkers when I get the chance, and they've noticed him hanging around some of their scenes too. When he showed up again, me and a uniformed police officer shake him down to see who the heck he is and why he's got a major hard-on for rubbernecking crime scenes. I'm used to rubberneckers, you know, I get it. People are curious and sometimes a bit morbid when something happens nearby. Once the excitement and newness wears off, they usually go on about their business. Mr. Fanboy doesn't have a criminal record, like not even speeding or a parking ticket, so my superior had a talk with him. Basically explained that he was making everybody nervous and it looked really shady to just start hanging out at all the crime scenes. So he disappears for a couple of weeks before switching to a new tactic. If you can't hang around the crime scenes, why not hang around the investigators? But of course, only the female ones. The fanboy shows up at one of my favorite dive bars that I frequent because it was near my home, over 30 miles from where I work. Now, I'm a 5'7" woman who doesn't look imposing in the least. My coworkers used to tease that I looked like I was a kid playing dress up in my uniform. Like most women, I tried to be polite with the guy, who at the time was about 20 years my senior, but declined any offer of a drink. He doesn't take the hints and chats me up with some of the creepiest stuff I have ever heard. What's the worst crime scene you've investigated? Have you ever worked on a case where the victim was dismembered? And do you think rape and murder cases are really about power dynamics and not sexually motivated? So I'm creeped the heck out. Those are things I don't even want to talk about with a therapist, much less a dude who is giving me some seriously rapey murdery vibes. I completely shut him down, not even trying to be polite, and he seemed a little put off but not apologetic in the least. I went home, put my service weapon back on, and called my supervisor to give them a heads up, and start a paper trail for an RO. He served with a cease and desist a few days later, and I figured that the threat of an RO and trouble with the police will deter him from escalating any further. Not even 24 hours after the cease and desist is delivered, he's back to shadowing crime scenes like it's going out of style. At another female investigator's scene, he gets into an altercation with one of the uniformed officers. He gets slammed with trespassing, obstruction, and a few other charges, but since he has no record, he's let out on bail, and shows up to a scene I'm working not 3 days later. We get into a scuffle after she breaks one of my guy's noses to get onto the scene. He's not as strong as he looks, but I still ended up with the black eye. He looked worse by the time my partner and I finally get him cuffed. An investigation is opened and turned up a police scanner and a lot of creepy journals in his car, as well as notes on where I lived and worked, along with info on one of the other female investigators. From what I heard through the grapevine, his mother's house, where he was living, was very creepy. Yeah, I never thought people would be that obsessed with crime scenes, forensics, or the like that they'd end up going to jail. But here we are. I'm also very aware that he probably had a lot of very unsavory things planned for me and or one of my coworkers, which still makes my skin crawl to this day. In my teens, I had my fair share of encounters with creepy old men, and after my last post here, I figured I'd post another encounter I had. This happened when I was 15, over a decade ago. Wow, I'm starting to feel old. I've told this particular story to friends for years, but I've never posted it online. There were a lot of long stretches of industrial area in the town I grew up in. Large plazas with big parking lots, stuck next to one another in wide open stretches of road and highway. The majority of my town felt like the area before an airport. Flat, gray, and functional. As a depressed teenager, I used to go out after school a lot by myself. First, it wasn't within my neighborhood, but it escalated to me leaving the quaint residential areas to walk an hour or two in any direction. I'd usually make my way home before dark, and I had a trusty flip phone at the time to call my parents if I needed to. Generally, I felt pretty safe walking on the main streets because of how populous they were. There were always plenty of cars on the road, and there were quite a few pedestrians out and about. One early summer evening at about dusk, I was making my way home from one of my walks. It was a route I'd taken a lot, and I was about a 40-minute walk from home. I was just passing a parking lot when a car pulled out in front of me. I stopped about 2 feet from the vehicle to let it turn onto the road, but the driver rolled down his window. "Hey, how are you?" he asked me. The man looked to be in his late 40s and greeted me with an unsettling enthusiasm. I wasn't sure how to respond, but since I couldn't pass his car, I hoped he just needed directions or something. I'm okay. How are you?" Before I could even finish my response, he says, "I love your style. Goth girls and boots are one of my fetishes," he said. And I am not paraphrasing. Now, as I said, I've been approached quite a few times by creepy men, but this guy was beyond bold. I had absolutely no idea how to respond. Just as I was going to try to formulate a response, a car pulled up behind him, meaning that he was blocking another car from exiting the parking lot. There's a car behind you trying to get out," I tell him, relieved that I now have a way to get out of this conversation. "I'll meet you in the next parking lot," he said. And as I try to tell him now that I need to get home, he drives off. In my mind, there was no way he could be serious. I continue walking, but sure enough, he's in the next parking lot. The parking lot he'd entered was down a bit of a hill, and he was standing beside his car. As soon as he saw me, he started waving me down. I'd been followed by cars before, and I was generally afraid of the idea of making a man angry and being stalked to my home. I assessed the situation. He was parked about 10 feet from a dive bar, and there were about 15 men outside on the patio, which meant that they could see me and would be in earshot if I screamed. I weighed the options between going down to meet them versus potentially being followed home and made the stupid decision to walk the slight incline. I honestly don't know why I didn't just pretend to be on the phone or call my mom. I don't remember what he said when I approached, but I kept my distance from him in his car so I wouldn't be easy to kidnap. He walked around to his trunk, and I felt myself tense up and take a step back. He then pulls out a pair of women's boots and approaches me slightly to show them to me. They were lace-up about mid-calf, maybe size 9. "Nice, aren't they?" he asks me. Yeah." I respond hesitantly. They were not nice, but my brain was on autopilot. "So you want to try them on for me?" he asks, smiling. I'm absolutely stunned. More than scared, I'm completely baffled that this is actually happening. "I think I'm a little young for you," I managed to say. "No, what, you're like 20, right?" "No, I'm 15. All the blood leaves his face, and he finally realizes that he's made a mistake. He quickly puts the boots back in his trunk and says something to the effect of, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're just so hot. But I know I shouldn't be saying that." Kind of laugh him off and exit gracefully. He drives out of there well above the speed limit. I'm relieved, but left absolutely bewildered and creeped out. Why was he carrying around a pair of women's boots? How many women did he approach? What the heck just happened? What would have happened if I were over 18? And why did his brain think that what he just did was okay, even if I had been old enough? I still can't wrap my head around everything that happened, and I don't know if he thought that it would actually work, even if I were an adult. I'm in my late 20s now, which means that if he approached me today, he probably would be more insistent. So creepy boots guy, let's never meet again. So this is long, but this girl has been messing with my life and harassing me for almost 2 years, and it just keeps escalating. About a year and a half ago, I moved from a small city to a major Midwest city, after I started dating my boyfriend Dean. I had grown up in the surrounding area and was super excited about finally getting to live in the city properly. I was still leasing an apartment in the old city and couldn't break the lease, so Dean let me crash at his place for most of the week while I tried to make freelance connections. One of the first places I visited was an art gallery that Dean's best friend was in the process of building. I cut my leg open on some old auto parts in the lot that they were cleaning out and developed a pretty bad infection, so while I was waiting for Dean and Emerson, the gallery owner, to pack up and drive me home, I started talking to lots of random artists who were passing through the worksite. Somewhere during this, I must have met Kate. I don't actually remember meeting her, but she tracked all of my social media accounts down and followed or friended me on all of them. Kate was a comic artist, she said, and was very opinionated about the direction the city was going and super confident about her work. I didn't know anyone else. Most of my college friends in the area hadn't returned home from internships, so I was really excited to have a female friend who was also an illustrator/comic artist. In the fall, when Dean left for a month, I house sat for him for a few days a week since I had 2 jobs, one in a new city and one in an old city, and I split my week between the 2 areas. To keep myself from getting stressed out, I started learning photography as a hobby and as a reason to get out of the house. Kate immediately commented on my status about it and requested to go along with me on one of my evening trips. The only issue is that I would have to pick her up in a fairly deserted part of town, by the old fairgrounds. Okay, I think. Weird, but I do really want to be friends with her and I don't like walking around alone. I drove to the fairgrounds and waited for about 45 minutes. No signs of Kate. I call and text her. Nothing. I get lost on the way back and I'm fuming mad and complain to Dean's housemate Lily. Lily takes me out for beers to vent about it and we end up becoming very close friends immediately. A couple weeks after this, right before Dean comes back to town, Lily and I get invited to Kate's art show. She makes a big deal about it, calls local newspapers, claims she's got a band and a sponsor deal. Not too crazy, since Emerson's gallery was hosting it. I figured she could have met friends to collab with, like Lily and I had. So we get dressed up and pregame a bit, and then head over. There's hardly any art up, and a couple people are uncomfortably walking around. Lily and I are getting a weird vibe, but Kate provided tons of liquor and free comic books, and her sponsor gave us free t-shirts. Score. We drink enough to mostly forget about Kate's weird attitude, and that she really only had one friend there, despite posts about a huge crowd. Later on, Kate likes all of my photos of the shirt and Lily wearing her shirt, and comments that we're super close friends, and that she was so glad we came. I hadn't actually remembered meeting Kate in person prior to this, and I know Lily hadn't, so that made us kind of uncomfortable. When Dean comes back, he comments on how close Kate and I seemed on Facebook. I laugh a little bit uncomfortably and say we've never really hung out. He brushes it off, and I do as well. In November, Kate frantically calls me, Dean and Emerson, asking for a place to sleep. She tells us that her roommate is being abusive and the cops won't come, and that she needs a place to crash, as she fears for her life. I'm super freaked out and offer to pick her up. She doesn't answer, so Emerson and I assume the worst and jump in my car. Right as we start driving, she calls us and announces that she's fine. A-okay. It's no big deal. Also, Emerson, I'm at your art space. Can I crash for a bit? She immediately gets a pizza on Emerson's tab and starts laughing and decides to host an impromptu party at the gallery, all the while claiming it was fine, but she had to go. In retrospect, this should have been the first red flag, but I wasn't about to claim someone's abuse story wasn't true. It did make me really suspicious, though, that it became okay with no repercussions. No issues with picking up her stuff, that turned out totally fine. The whole thing was solved by a pizza. Over the next couple of months, Kate starts going on crusades against random organizations that she's been involved with. Most of her criticism involves that they were somehow abusing or bullying her. I get fed up with it pretty quickly, especially when one of her prime complaints is, Incubator. Try to advertise my services and get me freelance clients. Like last time I checked, that was kind of a good thing. Over the winter, I had a bit of a mental breakdown and didn't see Kate around town as often. It was a struggle to not be snappy with her as I was feeling pretty negatively towards most people, and I couldn't deal with her conspiracy theories and false drama. Plus, she would always bring me pieces of art and seek out my approval, then scream at me every time I said something even vaguely critical at all. I just couldn't deal with that. In March, Dean took me out to see a show during a local bar and restaurant week, and several of our friends were rapping on stage during it. Emerson, a friend from out of town, Dean and I were hanging out with the bartender, another friend of ours, and we saw Kate arrive. All of us were wearing cocktail or club attire, but Kate was wearing a ratty sweatshirt and sweatpants, hadn't combed her hair. She's usually a casual dresser, but this came across pretty strongly as something is off, since she always made an effort to do her hair and put on jewelry with hoodies. She dragged my friend from out of town and the girl he was flirting with over to the other side of the bar and announced that I may have a sketchbook with me, but she is the real artist and he ought to hear about her comic. Now, not to be petty, but if we're going to compare work, her comic was really bad. My depression was affecting my ability to do good work, and even in comparison, hers was really bad. Like mediocre DeviantArt. No backgrounds, no plot, half the main people are vampires and hot guys, all drawn with her boyfriend's face. Yeah, I should note also that at the time of this I was 23 and assumed she was as well. I was annoyed but wanted to enjoy my night, so I shut up for a bit and listened. Then Emerson leaned over and, as we watched her down shots like a college freshman, he said, "Can you believe Kate is 33? She acts like a kid." What? So now my alarm bells were going off slightly. Like, why is Kate seeking out only people who are 10 years younger than her? And I looked closely and realized she physically looked her age, but being slightly heavier, she was intentionally playing up a slight baby face with hoodie, a ponytail, and minimal makeup. Kate then came over and spent most of the night rambling conspiracy theories at me, and insisted she could sense that the guys on stage were going to be involved in some kind of shootout. She was sure of it, and kept whispering into my face way too closely. Dean and I went to a diner afterwards and found that Kate had convinced the rap person Emerson to follow us, but eat at a separate table. She came over to my area and stage whispered, "It's okay. I think that because I'm with them, I've managed to save them from what fate wanted." Wow, we noped out of there so fast. It was really hard to avoid Kate entirely after that, even though I wanted to. She managed to show up the day Dean asked me to move in with him, but offered to help us paint our workspace, so we had to drive her home and listen to her theories about fate and horror movies and plots for her vampire comic the whole way back. We didn't end up celebrating because the mood was pretty well killed. On Facebook, she got increasingly unhinged. She'd latch on to any comment I or somebody else made that she could decide was negative and triggering for her. This would include anything from not liking her status to saying we didn't agree with the countdown of top coffee shops in the city. She'd then rant passive-aggressively on Twitter about whoever said it for hours. It started extending to her business, too. She accused one guy of blackmailing her and stealing her rent, when he'd actually paid her the full amount for art in advance, and was simply asking when it would be delivered by. She had an art show at a coffee house, but didn't even stay for 30 minutes of it, and stormed out in a screaming tantrum, because they decided to provide her with musicians for her show and serve coffee during it. She then called one of the local newspapers, claiming that they had severely wronged her and ruined her show. I think you get the picture. So, I've been pretty much trying to ignore her for the last year, but she keeps escalating her behavior. She's lately taken to telling Dean that I'm evil and isn't subtle about it. In October, she crashed a housewarming party that our coworkers were holding and started drunkenly yelling about how Dean should dump me for one of our colleagues. She also regularly stalks me on Twitter and Instagram and tweets about my evil activities without using names. But then as soon as I tell her to stop, she tells everyone openly that I'm an asshole and is ruining her life by bullying her. Somehow. Annoying, but boring to be totally honest. Most recently though, she started targeting my boss at an activist blog I work part-time for. I do a lot of design with mental health advocacy and queer issues, so I'm pretty visible to anyone trying to find me online. And one of my side duties for the blog is to find trans and queer media for my boss, Aiden, to check out, in case they make a good article. I noticed that Kate had published a comic that looks really good that was about trans characters and Afrofuturist themes. I was a little nervous about sending it over because Kate, but I figured it was unlikely that Kate would be angry about a positive review. Aiden was a bit concerned, as a queer trans writer, that this was being written by a cisgender author, so he asked her some friendly questions about plot summary and her sources for information about the community. Pretty standard book review stuff. Kate blew up, ranted at him via Twitter and called him racist for asking her about the comic, and it got to a harassment level where Aiden had to block her and shut down most of his non-work social media accounts for a while. She then signed into her professional account and pretended to be a spokesperson for her comic group, and called him racist again, and said that he was harassing and bullying her, despite him not being actually online for most of the day. It's been about 3 days. So far she's called his primary employer to try to get him fired for being a racist bully, which is not true at all, hunted down all of his Reddit, Tumblr, and even Amazon accounts, and has been arbitrarily messaging Redditors and random activists she finds online to tell them how horrible Aiden is. At the moment, he's not interested in calling the cops, but she escalated it today for me, where I might be. She found mine and Dean's address via a Facebook event, and has been telling random users on Twitter that I masterminded Aiden's campaign of harassment and giving them my email and other info for doxing purposes. Luckily, so far, nobody's really taken the bait, but I did get a lot of new followers on my art accounts who are all quote-unquote friends of hers. For all I know, they're also her. Aiden and I also have gotten a lot of emails sent to our blocked address, saying how much the art and banners suck and that I don't deserve to be working for it. I don't know that she's done anything with the address, but it scares me that she knows it. She likes Dean and my dog still, for some reason, but I'm scared that she'll try and steal my dog or break into our house, now that she knows where I live. She has the mentality that I don't deserve nice things like my dog or my career accomplishments as much as she does, which really creeps me out. So yeah, advice is welcome, but mostly I just had to get this off my chest. So this happened a few months ago, right when I was just married to my husband. I know it wasn't a product of wedding stress since people around me had been as freaked out as I was. My mother-in-law and I were out of town shopping and we stopped at the local Walmart on our way home. She had gone to look at air conditioning units and so I went to browse the book section. I just found something that caught my interest when I heard somebody say, "Jessica." I was in one of those, "Oh, there you are" tones of voices, like it was both a pleasure and a relief. Jessica isn't my name, but I look up anyway since it was loud and basically right next to me. Standing a few feet away, her shopping cart between her and me, was a thin woman, maybe late 40s, long brown hair and clothes, nicer than what you would expect to see on somebody who frequented Walmart. Her shopping cart was empty. She stood looking directly at me with a huge manic teeth-revealing grin, eyes bright. Because she's looking directly at me and there's no one else in the aisle, I feel obliged to talk to her. I smile because she's smiling and tell her she's made a mistake. My name's not Jessica. "There you are, sweetie. I was so worried about you." The woman continues and wheels up to me with my exuberance, making me shrink back because I can already smell the crazy. A few people are passing our aisle at this time, and the woman's overly exaggerated tone gets their attention. Some heads snap to look at us, but nobody stops. The woman, very warmly, as if I was her daughter, caresses my arm. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Honey, let's go. Your dad has been waiting." I am a person who is anxious to please other people, so I'd already taken a step forward when she gently pressed my back so I would walk. Then my brain asked, "What the heck are you doing?" And I did a little scuttle forward. "Jessica, honey, stop playing around, let's go." The woman had never yet lost her crazy smile. This time she grabbed my arm like a vice and started to pull. I pulled my arm back, setting in my heels and putting my body into motion. I tell her to leave me the heck alone or I'm going to find my husband. My husband isn't there, but she doesn't know this. The woman freezes and her face twitches. Dirty little bitch, she hisses, and wheels off down the aisle. You're ungrateful. I hear her shoot over her shoulder. Then when she reaches the end. Okay, bye pumpkin. See you for dinner. I wait and watch her turn the corner and disappear, and then go to the opposite way. I manage to find my mother-in-law and tell her what happened. She's a little disconcerted, but makes light of it, trying to make me feel better. When we are in the checkout line, I'm scanning around nervously, trying to see if she's anywhere near us. I spot her several checkouts down, and she spotted me. She's still got her weird smile on, and she's wandering away with her empty shopping cart. She has a hot beverage in one hand, which she drops and spills on the ground. She never stopped to even look at it. She just breezed out of the store. One of the employees watched her do this and leave, but never said anything to her. In fact, the expression on the employee's face made it seem like she was a little bit afraid. I have luckily never seen her again, and hopefully never will. Hey everyone, so I'm a guy from the UK. I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages most people imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everybody some context. I did actually post this story on a separate Reddit account several years ago in a different subreddit. However, I highly exaggerated it for the sake of the story, and this was a creative writing subreddit, I believe. I can't fully remember. I just remember the story I told wasn't 100% honest. So if you think you've read something similar before, then you probably have. But this is the full truth of what happened and is likely way less exciting than the original story, but oh well. So it started when I was around 15 years old, about 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back. However, this one night her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 19 or 20 and was overall pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mom, and the whole thing got kind of heated, and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay over. It was about 2 a.m. and I didn't want to call my own parents and worry of waking them up. My mom is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home around 3:30. So I walked along the weird concrete bit just above the beach, not sure of what that's called, and I stopped about half an hour of walking as there is a public toilet which is kind of run down, but also open 24 hours, and I was desperate. I was expecting it to be empty or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it, but I was wrong. There was this guy using the urinal. He looked to be in his mid to late 50s, I think. A little on the overweight side, but not extremely. He had gray messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember he made a quick joke about something I don't remember. I politely laughed and did my business and left. After about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. It started to rain heavily and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember this was around November time, so it was pretty cold. Anyways, I'm walking and a car drives by, beeps and pulls over just in front of me. I had assumed it was someone I know but couldn't think who. Got to the car and the dude from the toilet was inside. He asked me where I was headed and I told him. He said that was a long walk and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, and he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was very bad, and at the time he wasn't giving me any weird vibes. The drive took like 15 minutes, I think. The more I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off about him. He was telling me his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot, and they drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask someone that you are giving a simple lift home to. Anyways, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I said that my house wasn't accessible by road and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to ring him when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I was okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point he knew my full name, and he just said Pete. My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me. Just kept saying, just call me Pete. I later found out that Pete was a fake name too. Anyways, I got into my house and texted him just to let him know I was safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then I was full of bad decisions, to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to be normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me well. I replied to the first few and then started ignoring them. He then started trying to ring me every single evening. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly ring until I would answer. He was sending me these texts inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story of a friend that he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old I was talking about, and accidentally let it slip that the guy called him John. I confronted him about this and said, I thought your name was Pete. He said, oh no, my friend's name is John. I said, you just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom. He said, oh well, some people call me John. It's like a nickname, but his name is John too. He hesitated saying this, and I kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing, but he kept asking. After a while, my mom wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she rang him herself from her phone and told him that if he ever carried on texting me and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew this. I always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon and played with her for 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street just near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were always left on and the engine was always running. Also, I recognized his car. I would occasionally notice the car door open in a large flash from that direction, as if somebody was taking pictures. I started changing the time I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either or late to coincide with when I was walking her. This went on for months and I never mentioned it to anyone, but one day it just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. Never saw his car anymore. Not text messages or phone calls from him. It all just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18 to 19 after the aforementioned dog died. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my PC so that I always had them. I turned on a phone which had been turned off for several years now and still had the old SIM in it. That's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an odd one, and it was about 14 months old. It said something along the lines of, hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over the new year I was diagnosed with an illness and I've been told I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at, sent me his address, and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so I can have a last chat with you. Got some beers in, and if it gets too late you can stay the night. Just drop me a phone call when you want to come around so I can get everything ready for you. See you soon. No idea if Pete or John was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. Never been to the address he sent me and never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him and that was the last I heard from the guy. So yeah, that's the story. Not tremendously exciting, but kind of had a big impact on me during those years. Hope you all enjoyed. In the spirit of Halloween, I will share an incident that happened to me last October. It was 10 a.m. on a weekday and I had the day off, so I decided to go to the grocery store and get some pumpkins to carve. I did my shopping with no problems and didn't notice anything off since it was earlier in the day and the other shoppers were elderly. I bought 3 large pumpkins and had them in a cart to put in the trunk of my car. As I was putting the first pumpkin in my trunk, holding it with one arm, opening the trunk with the other, and my back to the parking lot, I feel somebody pulling the pumpkin out of my arm backwards. I spun around and threw that pumpkin in the process to see 2 men directly behind me. I'm a very small girl, so I immediately felt endangered. The one man, who I assumed was the man who first grabbed at me, made an attempt to scream at me in a language I didn't understand and grab at me again. I pushed the cart with the remaining pumpkins at the 2 men and got in my car to lock the doors and drive away. The 2 men got into a white brand new Dodge Charger with temp plates and sped out of the parking lot after me. The street we both pulled out on was a busy 4-lane, 25-mile-per-hour business district. You can't safely speed. That didn't matter to the Dodge Charger, who weaved in and out of traffic to try and run me off the road. The driving was so erratic that another driver attempted to box the Charger in. Didn't matter much. They went into incoming traffic anyway. Meanwhile, I threw my left turn signal on and made a quick right into a coffee and donut chain I regularly frequent. Next to this coffee chain is a pizza chain, not yet open. I noticed that the Charger had pulled into this pizza chain and was waiting for me to pull out the coffee chain parking lot. I frantically told the employee what was going on through the drive-thru while I ordered a snack. I was there and didn't want to pull out yet. This coffee chain knows me well, and on this day, the manager went above and beyond the call of duty. She called the police, who told her to have me pull around to the window. She did, knowing I would be in full view of the Charger, so she came outside to stand between us with the biggest rolling pin I've ever seen in my life. She stared those men down like my own mother would have. The cops came and took statements. The Charger was still there and searched. One officer told me they pulled tarp and rope from the trunk and are treating this as a trafficking attempt. Both men refused to answer any questions and were arrested. I don't know for sure what their intent was, but I live in a sanctuary city with mostly people from Nepal or Bhutan, and I have never had a scary issue. I love my neighborhood, but I did not recognize these men or their car frequenting the neighborhood. That day, I bought everybody working at that coffee chain a gift certificate for a massage as a thank you for protecting me, and I still tip them every morning extra a year later. For some background, when I was around 16 or 17, I worked at a local Tim Hortons store for some extra cash. Nothing too unordinary, just a lot of old folks coming to get their coffee and morning office runs. It wasn't until I started covering midnights for people on the weekends when a strange man started appearing randomly. It started with him picking up money from the drive-thru lane, which is by law illegal. He was talked to and stopped picking up the change, but at night in the drive-thru cameras, there was always 2 pinpricks of whitish-greenish lights coming from the garden and whispers in our headsets that none of us would admit to. I always thought it was my coworkers playing tricks on me. We had a lot of jokesters. The whispers would say things like, "I will skin your bones," and "You will enjoy your last bagel." I always got a bagel on break. It made me shiver at the thought somebody was always watching, but again, it was most likely my coworkers. The man became bolder, and he started ordering weird things like a biscuit not toasted with butter. But then he wanted it toasted and soaked in coffee. One night he came in with blood on his shirt, and when we asked him if he needed first aid or an ambulance, he just said that he needed to pee and that he was fine. My supervisor called the police right away as she came in from changing the outside garbages and was bawling her eyes out. She asked me as the phone rang if anyone had come inside, and I said, "Yes, a man. He went to the washroom, but I think he's hurt." She screamed as she realized it wasn't his blood. She told the operator, I was changing the outside garbages when I saw a man laying on the sidewalk. He was caked in blood and not breathing. I think the killer is in the bathroom. The police department was no longer than 5 minutes away, and they dragged the man out of the washroom. He was completely naked and trying to touch himself with the blood of the man he killed. I threw up when he started to get very aroused and orgasm. The store was closed after that, and from what I know, it wasn't an aggravated killing. And even worse, I don't think it hit the news. I'm not sure why these things never hit mainstream news, but I feel like it's the company covering it up. When I was a teenager, probably 16 and male, I took a female friend and went to a nearby big city to see Panic at the Disco in concert. This was their pretty odd era, and Ryan and Ross were still in the same band. I was super excited, but the concert was far enough that we didn't want to drive back that night, so we got a hotel room. My grandparents drove us, so we had our own hotel room, my grandparents next door. When my grandpa picked us up after the concert, we decided that we weren't ready for bed. Still high from the concert and also sore from all of our dancing and tireless attempts to start mosh pits at the show. We went out to where the front desk was, and there was a man at the desk, not super old but old enough to think of us as kids. We manipulated him into letting us into the pool after hours, telling him that we were sore from the show and sweaty too. He told us to be quiet and not make a big mess in there, and we agreed. It was fine. We decided, however, to see if we could get him to give us some food. Took us to the kitchen, but other than fruit, there was nothing that didn't need to be cooked, so he goes, "Well, if you don't tell anyone, I'll go get you a steak and shake." And we agreed enthusiastically. So he leaves, and he's gone for a little while, and this is where it gets weird. When he comes back, he has a huge bottle of whiskey with him. He invites us, 2 minors, back to drink and eat in the office with him, so us being dumb kids, we accept. He proceeds to show us on the office computer his MySpace profile, where his name is something like Timmysaurus Rex, and he's like 31 years old. Kind of weird alone, but it gets weirder. He wants to add us, and we lie and say we don't use MySpace because, what the heck, we don't want to be friends with somebody almost twice our age. And he's like, oh, okay. So I'm getting weird vibes at this point and don't drink much, and once we've both had some alcohol, he tells me and my friend it would be cool if we took our pants off and copied our butts in the copier machine because it would be funny. And I'm like, nah. But my friend stupidly does it. So we're still hanging with him, both not knowing that the other was only doing it because they didn't want to awkwardly leave. So at some point I leave, for some reason, at which point I wouldn't find out until later. He kissed my friend, and she obviously pulled away and left and didn't let it go any further. Then I came back and wasn't sure where she went, so I asked Timmy if he'd help me find her, and she was like, sure, I have to put bills on the doors. So he was going room to room and putting the bills on the doors when he suddenly backed me. An inexperienced and also ugly, awkward boy against the wall and kissed me really greedily, like with lots of super wet tongue. I pulled away super awkwardly and kind of awkwardly said he tasted like alcohol, and he laughed. So eventually we find my friend, and I grab her and pull her away from him and tell him that we'll wait for him in the front. When I tell her he kissed me once we were away from him, and she was like, what the heck, same. So we were both super creeped out at this point and decided to sneak back to our room before he gets back to us, and just kind of sat there for a while thinking like, okay, that was weird. How about we don't tell anyone? Thankfully, when we woke up to check out, somebody else was working the front desk. We left, and I didn't tell any adults until years later. Thrifting is my favorite hobby, if you can call it that. It's something I like to do alone when I get the time, as it's a chance for my brain to shut off and just let go as I scan aisles crammed with random things for hours. Note, I'm a 5'5" former elementary teacher. I'm about as intimidating as a wet sock, and I'm pretty quiet and stay to myself in public. I had decided to go out of my way to a store I hadn't been to before and follow my usual routine. When I'm in a store, it's just me and the items. I don't pay any mind to anyone around me, as the stores are crowded and I'm really only there to do my own thing. So imagine my surprise when an older woman turned to me and said in a huff, "Can I help you?" I turned and looked around me to make sure I was who she was talking to. I just shook my head no, making a confused expression, and went back to looking at shoes. Things were okay for a minute before I heard her in the next aisle talking to her friend. "This creepy woman is following me. Every time I look up, she's there." There is only so much space in the store. I usually go along the edges and then make my way to the center of the store, so there is a good chance she probably just saw me doing my thing. I tried to avoid her until I realized she started talking to random people around me about how creepy I was and how I was stalking her. People started giving me funny looks, but paid no mind once they realized how harmless and shrimpy I look. Her? Really?" someone said. "Yeah, and I'm gonna mess her up if I see her again." She began making more and more aggressive comments, and I decided I had enough. I've never fought anyone in my life, and I really wasn't planning to that day. I left my items and went to my car. Yeah, something was up with her, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what it was. To the actual creepy lady in the thrift store, let's not meet again. I was friends with two people, Tammy and Aaron. Well, more so friends with Aaron than Tammy, but we'll get into that. This story is primarily about Tammy. I met Aaron in my freshman year of college, and we quickly became best friends. Soon, Aaron began dating Tammy, and they were basically inseparable. As such, due to proximity, I was forced to be friends, or at least friendly, with Tammy. Whenever I'd hang out with Aaron, 9 times out of 10, Tammy would be there too. Tammy and I had a few common interests: video games, certain board and card games, so I decided to give her a shot. However, I quickly found Tammy to be insufferable. She was rude, narcissistic, and had a hair-trigger temper. Everybody I will talk to about Tammy would say the same. Despite this, I had to remain friendly with her whenever she was around. In her mind, this made us best friends, though for me it was more of an appeasement. I feel like she latched onto me because I was one of the few people who was willing to tolerate her. As you can imagine, she had very little in the way of friends. Fast forward to 4 years later, Tammy and Aaron are still dating and now living together. It's an extremely toxic relationship. Tammy would scream at Aaron daily over small things, making them terrified to make any mistakes in front of Tammy. Aaron felt trapped in the relationship. I was doing everything I could to convince them to leave, no matter the potential costs. Thankfully, Aaron eventually stood up for themselves and ended up breaking up with Tammy last November. However, Tammy still wanted to keep her perceived friendship with me. Part of me felt bad for her. I unfortunately can be a bit of a bleeding heart, so I humored her but did my best to keep her at arm's length. She gave me an unsolicited gift for Christmas, a deck of Magic the Gathering cards. We played that a decent amount of times together. However, I already owned this deck but did not have the heart to tell her that. Instead, I politely thanked her and took the cards. Later, I quietly regifted the cards to my real best friend. This will be important later. Fast forward to my birthday, which was recently, not gonna give the exact date, Tammy gave me yet another unsolicited gift. This time it was homemade weed cookies. I am a stoner, but I have a notoriously low edible tolerance compared to my weed tolerance. Such even low doses of edibles like 5 mg THC tend to be too intense for me, and I usually just stick to smoking bud. She claimed that the cookies were dosed at 20 mg THC a cookie. I was ready to eat these, but decided, what the heck, and ate 1/4 of a cookie. That's right, 1/4. Despite that tiny amount, about 45 minutes later, I began to feel abnormally high. The room began spinning for me. This tends to happen for me when I smoke too much at once. I have a rug in my living room and it has a particular zigzag pattern. It began to move beneath me in an unnerving and nauseating pattern. I've done a few mushroom trips in my day and age, and this felt very similar. However, I have never experienced anything close to this with weed. Then my heart began beating extremely fast, to the point where I genuinely felt like I was having a heart attack. No matter how many breathing exercises I did, I could not get it to calm down. Finally, I felt extremely nauseous, probably from seeing the room spinning, and I ran to the bathroom and stayed there for about an hour in front of the toilet. I gagged and dry heaved several times, but nothing ended up coming out. Approximately 4 hours later, I began to feel normal again and was able to get some sleep. The next day, I felt like I had a hangover, akin to taking 10 shots the previous night. I confronted her about my bad experience the previous night, and I kid you not. She simply said, "Oh, oopsies, it was actually more like 80 to 90 milligrams per cookie." It took everything in my power to not slap her over that. I calmly expressed that I no longer wished to continue our sham of a friendship and promptly blocked her on all platforms. I have not since spoken to her, and it is definitely for the best. Come to find out a few days later that my best friend had casually mentioned the re-gifting to Tammy a few days after before she made the cookies. As such, while I have no definitive proof, I am inclined to believe she took this personally and made the cookies as a form of revenge against me. I'm glad I only ate 1/4. Dear people of Reddit, do I have a story for you? I will start by saying, though my story is not long, it is very scary considering it could have gone much worse than it did. This happened just last night in a place my kids, my wife, and I just moved into a week and a half ago. It's a small place in a rough area, but I grew up in this area and it was affordable. So on Friday, my sister-in-law has a son who was going to be in the hospital the entire weekend getting surgery. My wife and I volunteer to watch the newborn daughter. So Saturday, my niece is sleeping all day, which brings me to Saturday night. She wakes up right before sunset, is nonstop crying. My wife and I guess she misses her mom, but we can't really do anything about that. Mom is in the hospital. In order to give my wife some peace, I go to the living room to chill with the crying baby. I am rocking her back and forth, giving her a pacifier, and her spitting it out. Good times. What happens next is so perfect that I'm glad it happened the way it did. My daughter, 10 years old, comes out the kids' room and says, "Daddy, if you're tired, I can watch the baby." I was going to refuse, but my wife shouted from the room that she should do it. So in my head, I'm like, why not take a quick break before they all gotta go to bed? At first, I thought I'd lay in bed with my wife, but she was watching an action movie. Taken. I wanted some quiet time after a long day. I tell her I'm going to look through my work bag in the living room for a few minutes, and I work as an armed guard, so I check that. Badge, name tag, all my permits and paperwork are in the right place, and that nothing is missing. Then I see a flash of light through my window. I look out the window and I see nothing. I noticed a helicopter flying around, so I think the light was the helicopter. I sit back down and look at my lockbox and decide. One quick look at my gun won't hurt, if it's unloaded anyways. Well, of course, as I'm pulling it out, my daughter comes out of the room. She was going to ask if we fed the baby when she paused. I hastily shoving my gun back in the lockbox so she wouldn't see it, didn't hear anything. So I asked, "Sorry, what did you say?" And she is still frozen staring at the door. I asked what was wrong and she said, "Somebody knocked on the door real hard." So I brush it off as maybe her imagination or the helicopter, when a booming crash comes from the door and it bursts open. It felt like an hour passed as my daughter and I stared at the empty black doorway. My son, 8 years old, comes out of his room to ask what happened. I regained my composure and shouted for my kids to run in my room with my wife and to lock the door. And I loaded my handgun, grabbed my flashlight. So I checked my door and I was still able to lock it. I check around the entire perimeter of the house and I find nothing. So whoever tried to break into my house when I was obviously home, let's not meet because I am waiting for you. I went to this primary school from 2006 to 2008. I was 12 when this happened and my sisters were 10. The school is horrible. Teachers would swear and throw things at you, and the principal did nothing about them. After school, I would either be in chess club or working in the library. Yes, I was a nerd that had bad grades, and after school, our chess teacher would give my sisters and I a lift home. A few weeks after he started giving us a lift home, we noticed a combi was following us. I remember it clearly. It was white with curtains on the windows. So, we, my sisters and I, circled around the block to ensure that we were being followed, and we were. Totally freaked out, we went to our neighbor's house and they let us in, and the neighbor's husband stood outside with a bat in his hands. When our parents got home, they contacted the school and the police. The next 2 weeks, we had to work with the police, and they apparently found the guy. I overheard the police saying that the man must have had a partner. That statement stuck to me. I refused lifts from any male teachers and male friends of our parents, so we walked home from then on, but with a group. Fast forward a little while, I was 15 and my sisters were 13. My sisters and I are now in high school. We decided to go visit the primary school. As we got there, we bumped into one of the students we knew, and he told us the chess teacher got arrested. I asked him for what, and what he said next sent a chill down my spine. He told us that the teacher got arrested for attacking children. He got caught when he tried to put an 11-year-old girl in his club room, and she screamed for help. To think he gave us a lift home and had some equipment in the boot of the car. I contacted the cop who dealt with the combi case and asked him about the teacher. It turned out the teacher told the combi guy about us and was planning to take one of us if we hadn't gone to our neighbor. Please guys, have your kids vigilant at all times. Set something up with a neighbor in case your kids are in trouble and they need to get away and you're not around. Stay safe. Okay, so around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mom, dad, and older sister in an old-ish house in a very small village. When I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses occupied mostly by very old people. All the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were so far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I'd wake up at around 10 or 11. By this point, mom, dad, and sister had all left for work, so I had the house to myself. I'd go downstairs, make some toast, watch some random stuff on TV for an hour, before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy cut off from the world by many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else was downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediately right to my sister's room. Basically, the way this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that the ceilings in both of our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down. Because of where the slant met the wall, we had crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. These were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff, like Christmas decorations and old forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time you were in there, you had to be crawling on your hands and knees. Anyways, this one morning I'm awakened to a familiar noise. Some sort of small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual noise. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and pretty much had the run of the storage spaces, so no matter how many traps were put down. Thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was, while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she'd just not gone to work that day for whatever reason and continued munching. Around an hour or two later, I went back upstairs and booted my PC. As I was waiting, I turned around to my open door and faced my sister's closed one and realized it was late in the day and she had yet to leave her room. An odd thing, since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that maybe she was at work and I'd imagined the noise from upstairs, but as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely somebody in there, so it must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small TV in her room and no books, so what she had been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there, so what was up? I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, but maybe she had headphones or something on. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again, but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought. Screw it. I'm just gonna go in, so I cracked the door open and peered around. I found an empty room. Nobody inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out of the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half of your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers. Don't be stupid. Until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole, into the crawl space. I lost my cool. Very quietly though, I might add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager that I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon I could find. The fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years previous. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mom, who worked about a 5-minute drive from our house. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. In this time, I made a small upgrade from fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mom and her boss, John, turn up and I tell them everything leading up to this point. They say okay and we all set off upstairs to investigate. Me, rather unheroically, bringing up the rear with my golf club. I get into my sister's room and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mom is just hard as nails or massively stupid, but while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open, and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho hobo, murderer hiding in there, before she shouts, "Chris, what the heck are you doing in there? Get out." Small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said, "Yep, that's cool," and as far as mom and dad knew, he'd headed home. What really happened was, instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he'd left, then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my mom shouted my sister up for work like she did every morning and would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everybody had left for the day. One small hitch in the plan that they did not think of was, you guessed it, me. They'd forgotten I was home and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, so he was trapped. When I knocked, he hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. Anyways, my mom swiftly told him to get the heck out and not come back. Sadly, this was not the last time we saw that guy, as it turned around he'd stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he'd been hiding out, and then because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows, trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city when I went to uni, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. A super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all of this, as I mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He'd been in there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet, but no worry for this guy because he had lots of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to clean up. And finally, around a year later, as Mom was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag filled with feces. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, taking a poop amongst our tinsel and tree. So, sister's baby daddy, who hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom, let's not meet, yeah? This happened to me 2 to 3 years ago. I was around 23 at the time. I am a female and I live in Romania. One night I was coming home from class. Masters. Classes start after 6 p.m. and end at 10 p.m. or around 11 p.m. I had to take the subway for about 12 stops. The destination I had to get off at was the end of the line for the subway. At that time, there wouldn't be many people in the subway. I'm a pretty lonely person. All I need is my headset and my music and I'm good to go. Said and done. I plug in my music, pick the furthest chair in the subway, away from the only 2 people that were taking the subway with me at the time. So far so good, until I see with the corner of my eye, a silhouette approaching me and sitting right next to me. It was a man, fairly built, dark hair, wearing glasses, a black shirt with a black hoodie, and a sickening smile. He doesn't engage in talking with me, but would just stare at my phone as I would browse through my music. I can hear him breathing heavily, not like painfully, but still like he was feeling something very strong. I feel uneasy, so I decide to change my seat and go even further behind, trying to avoid him without looking like a freak myself. I don't know to who. There was just another person with us the whole way. I guess that kind of scared me even more. I pick a new chair, sit down, plug my headset again, and proceed with the remaining 6 to 12 stops on my way home. I see the silhouette growing bigger and bigger and a breeze running on my skin as I realize the guy is again sitting right next to me. Glancing in midair, dead eyes, a big smile, staring right into my phone. I panic. There are still 4 stops to go. I have nowhere to hide. I look after the other person in the subway trying to sit next to her, thinking that strength comes in numbers. She is no longer there. I start shaking a bit, but not allowing the creeper to notice me being vulnerable. I stand up, go to the door, and just decide to stand until my stop comes. This way he won't sit next to me, right? Well, he comes straight after me and sits on the chair right near the door, and because he couldn't see my phone, on which he was so focused so far, from that angle, he fixates me right in my soul with his black dead eyes and says, "Hi, gorgeous. Why are you avoiding me?" I'm freaking out as I look at my phone trying to call my boyfriend or message him, and he stops me by saying, "I know nobody will help you. You would have sent an SOS message by now, and I know you didn't." That moment I realize I am cornered. He has been focusing on my phone to see who I was talking to, trying to figure out if I panicked, trying to see if I would ask someone for help. He had me cornered pretty bad. I had the luck to reach my stop as I would delay any reaction or ignore him so that he would repeat whatever he wanted to say. I drop off and run for the exit, not looking back. I get out at the surface and I don't see him anymore. This moment I put my phone in my purse and realize I had pepper spray with me all along. My heartbeat comes back to normal as I know at least I have something to defend myself with, but still a long way to get home, and who knows if he is alone or not. I walk rather fast for maybe 5 minutes from the metro and feel a hand grabbing my wrist hard and pulling me back. Another hand covering my mouth, disabling me from screaming my lungs out. It was him. The same black hoodie, dark hair, and dead-eyed stalker. He was furious and said, "Running from me? How dare you run away from me? You should be honored. I give you attention. I am fairly built for a woman, 80 kilograms and 1.75 meters tall, so I guess he thought men don't find me beautiful or something and should feel blessed that a creep like him stalks me and tried to hurt me. Now, my phone is in my bag. I can't call the police. I can't reach for the pepper spray. I panic. I can't punch him in the crotch. I can't scratch him as I don't have long nails. His hand is still in my mouth. What do I do? I did the most desperate and disgusting thing I could think of just to save my life. I played along. I used my other hand to touch the inside of his thigh and mumble "I'm sorry," while his hand was still on my mouth. He took his hand off and I repeated that I'm sorry. Didn't realize he was just flirting. He let his guard down and took his hand off my wrist. He asked me for my phone number and address to drop me off, but I refused, saying I'd rather add him on Facebook, and he agreed. I told him I'd reach for my phone, but instead picked the pepper spray and got him all over his face. Made tread cover both his eyes, nose, mouth, even his ears and hands. He instantly got all red, suffocating from the pepper and swelling. I called the police, told them what happened and what I did. They asked me if he is immobilized, and I said yes, as the effect wears off in like 45 minutes. Police arrived there 5 minutes later to see me shaking like a leaf and a man on the ground swollen like a pumpkin, throwing up and swearing at me between gasps of breath. He was arrested, and the police told me they had been looking for him for the past week, as they discovered the body of a 24-year-old woman in his apartment, with red hair. I have red hair too. The woman was his girlfriend, and ever since, he's never gotten back to his apartment. I don't know what he wanted to do with me. I can understand why he targeted me due to the similarities, but a stranger in the subway stalking women at midnight, trying to befriend them, or worse, murder them. I really hope I never meet you again. First, a little bit of background. I teach first grade in a high poverty area. This is rough territory with lots of gangs, hard drugs, and prostitution. Just a couple of years ago, the police arrested a woman and several men. The mom had pimped her 2 special needs daughters to the men for money to buy drugs. Obviously, you get the idea. This is not a good area to be alone in, especially after dark. Anyways, it was early September and I had a new student, named Grace. She was very timid, had low self-confidence, and always seemed very nervous. I kept a very close watch on her because I know these can be warning signs of abuse. One Monday, as I took my class outside to play, I noticed strange-looking marks on Grace's legs. Little round indentations marched from her calves to her thighs. She was in shorts. The spots were red and looked painful. I thought she might have some kind of skin rash, so I asked her how she got the marks. Grace told me in a nonchalant way that I was being bad after school on Friday, so Daddy had to take the brush to me again. I was dumbfounded and honestly a little bit confused. A brush? Then I understood. Her father had beaten her with a bristle brush hard enough to leave indentations on her skin 2 days later. Now, I'm a mandated reporter and I take this seriously. I called CPS and they were there that afternoon to talk to Grace and photograph her injuries. At that point, I am out of the picture and CPS takes over. I don't get updates on the situation, so I had no idea what happened. Grace never returned to school, but her father did. He showed up one evening as I was preparing to leave the school, about 5:30, parked his truck in such a way that I could not move my car, then jumped out carrying a baseball bat. He screamed all kind of things at me, about how I terrified his daughter because she was in custody, how I was a nosy bitch who didn't know my damn place, and how now he was going to show me exactly what I deserved. He meant it too. The man had the cold eyes of a fish, and I knew if he could, he would do serious harm to me. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't run from him. He was massive and had at least 100 pounds on me, all muscle. If I locked myself in my car, I'd be a sitting duck while he smashed the windows in with the bat. So I said goodbye to my dignity and started screaming for help. Now, I'm petite, but years of teaching have given me the lung power of a megaphone, and I can be pretty loud. People across the street heard me and came out to see what was happening. The great part of working in a small community is that you know everyone and they know you, especially if you are a teacher. A couple fathers of former students came over to help while the nearby woman dialed 911. He never did calm down and kept screaming about all the things he was going to do to me for turning him into CPS. Even when the police arrived, he continued his tirade. They arrested him, but I'm not sure what the charges were. I don't think they can get him for assault since he never touched me. For the rest of the school year, I had an armed escort to my car after school. Again, small community, and our police are wonderful people. Interestingly enough, I had somebody from one of the local gangs tell me that we're keeping a watch because I had taught his little sister earlier and she liked me. That was a surreal moment, let me tell you. I went to the police station a few days ago to put down a complaint about some person who scammed me when I was trying to get a graphics card. A guy who seems nice overheard the conversation and proposed me to come over as he had spare electronic equipment that he did not use anymore, saying that if it could help someone else, he'd be glad to give it out. Now, I didn't really put any hope into it, as it wasn't likely that I'd find something interesting, but I took up the offer. He didn't have that fishy person aura, so I accepted coming over in a few days. I wouldn't show up alone though, just in case. A few days after, I go to the house with my brother. First, the guy is not wearing a mask and tries to shake my hand. There's this old person in the background watching us, beer in hand. I can see from here that the yard is a complete mess, things everywhere. He guides us inside and we take a look around, and then he starts pulling stuff out of a bag, and it's like 15 to 20 years old of a graphics card that are completely worthless. So I told him it ain't gonna work, it was too old. He tells us to follow him to the garage, which is even more of a mess than the yard. Things laying everywhere, and there's a very dirty pool, not even covered, although we are still in winter. He shows us one of the first generation of graphics cards. Old and bulky. I tell him it's not going to work either, and he takes us to a shed behind the house with even more stuff. A very shady place in a weird alley, and freaked out a little bit because the older person, who hadn't said a single word, was following us. He rumbles through his shed, telling me the card he intended to give me was somewhere, but he can't find it. Too bad. I prepare to go away, but then he asks me if we could look at a PC that doesn't boot. I accept and go inside the room, which is apparently the kid's room and is as messy as every other room. I approach the computer and it's missing keys. It's kind of dirty everywhere. I sit down with my brother and starts fiddling with the computer. The grandpa appears out of nowhere and sits behind my brother, which kind of freaks me out more by the way he looks at us. I'm trying to fix the PC. And as I'm doing so, the mother comes in and tells me that she doesn't know much about computers and such, but that she goes on the dark web. She asks me if I can check every device in the house to make sure they haven't been pirated, and that she's being spied on. At that point I look at my brother, confused, and we kind of mentally communicate, yeah, we need to get out, it's starting to get weird. I tell the guy that I can't seem to fix it and that it's above what I know, and he's okay with it. The old man lights up a cigarette in the room and we get out of there. The guy keeps us and talks for like 5 minutes. They seemed like they wanted us to stay. We tell them that we have a bus to catch and kind of walk quickly out of here. The mother stops us and asks if we're going to come back to inspect if their devices are pirated, and I just say that we'll contact them again. Panicked and blocked the number when I got out of there. I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time, I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict though, so my memory is kind of hazy, so I do apologize if most details aren't there and major other events are left out. I'm now sober almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, somewhere between Richfield and another town, one of those small towns in between. I'd finished at the store late, about 10 to 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning rather than drive the 2 hours in the morning. As I'm driving down the highway, Google Maps has told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, turned left into it. A long dirt road with nothing around me. Pitch black darkness other than my high beams. Maybe 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanic knowledge. Of course, I look down at my phone and see I had no cell service at all. I check my work phone and it's the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I could get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but this trip I had forgotten to bring it with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this unless you had to or it led to a specific point. And I wouldn't even call it a road, to be honest, more of a trail. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall. I'm not anxious or get scared very easily. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. Every step further from the truck made me feel more tense though. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing. Something you would hear out of a kid's show. Right behind me, I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots are sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb. I hear it again, but closer, louder, like if it were 4 to 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now, eyes darting like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in the paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something, or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby. Crouched down, my right knee hurting from all of the rocks on the ground. But I didn't care. I needed to hide. The rocks were one of those 3-footish mound rocks. The moon was shining bright so I could see some things. As I'm scanning the desert, I see silhouettes of 2 people running. I can barely make them out, but my eyes have them adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off to not give away my location. I hear them talking, but I'm far enough away to not be able to understand what they're saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything I had done wrong in my life. They didn't even send because I didn't have any service, just coping with the traumatic event. I'm not a small guy, by the way, 5'10" and 230 pounds, but I was unarmed and outnumbered. And who knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general direction of where they were at. Scrambling around like mosquitoes, I had the thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 small rocks. I'm not religious, but I tried praying to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away toward the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly crouch walked through the brush back to the truck. Forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. There were 3 confirmed people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brushes stab me into my cargo work pants. I hear them tailing me. I could not turn around. I did not care to see who it was or what it was chasing me. I see the truck. The truck driver's side door is completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and found the door open more. Flew into the driver's seat in the truck and did the most stupid thing ever, but it was the only thing I could think of. I started it. It took a couple of tries to start it, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I saw hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off into the pitch dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as it drove. Silence. Nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I seen town lights. I was sweating, white knuckles on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m., threw myself into a local 7-Eleven looking terrified. The cashier asked me what was wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old burly looking man. I'm covered in tattoos, head to toe, so he treated me almost as a criminal myself. LOL. Turns out, some hose had burst. Do not remember exactly what it was. I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and said to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. Mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops weren't much help though. They basically looked at me like I had been up too long and I was hallucinating. I was not, and had asked me if I had taken drugs or had drunk and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I can't remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call came and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it, and I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, expensive tools and copper? I have no idea. I'm just curious. Who do you think these people were, and why were they hunting me like an animal? Has anyone had a similar experience before? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? Edits. The truck was looted. I remember all the wire, pipe, and some power tools were taken. We humans are not afraid of being alone in the dark, but of finding someone else in the dark with us. This took place when I was, around 7 or 8, so my brother must have been 12 or 13 when this happened. Since my brother was now considered a teenager, my dad figured it would be safe to stop asking my grandma to pick my brother and me up after school because he couldn't since he was working. He was an extremely hard-working single father. Anyways, so my brother and I started walking home alone after school, after getting off of the bus. It was like a 2-minute walk back to our place from the bus stop. Shortly after, a middle-aged man with the creepiest vibes started showing up across the street from our house, and he would just stare. Mainly, he wore this beat-up, extremely dirty and vibrant jumpsuit. Like, very vibrant. The only reason I saw him was because of that jumpsuit that looked like it belonged to the 80s. He wouldn't do anything. He would just stare at our house from across the street. He would usually appear 5 minutes after we got home, then leave maybe 5 to 10 minutes before my dad got home. At first, I thought he was just a strange new neighbor. It wasn't uncommon in my area for creepy old men, or pedophilic construction workers and drunk college students to lurk around town. It was about all my dad could afford at the time. After a while, though, I got a bad feeling that he wasn't a neighbor. He grew somewhat ballsy. At this point, he had openly been observing us for about half a year. It soon escalated from him just staring at us when we got home to him physically waiting at my brother's and my bus stop. 1. I already hated going home after school. And 2, this creep is now practically making this unavoidable. I was a bundle of nerves, and so was my brother when we got off the bus and saw the guy standing there staring at us. I immediately grabbed my brother's hand and started fast walking home. I hated hearing his footsteps lurk behind us. My scaredy cat-o-meter was finally so damn off the charts that I was begging my brother to call the police. Instead, he grabbed the metal baseball bat that was next to the door and told me that if anyone, besides our dad, walked through that door, he would kill them. I was so mad at him for weeks after that, but looking back now, I kind of extremely admire my prepubescent brother who would be willing to do anything to protect his little sister. That night, we finally told our dad about our daily evening visitor. He was furious, but also sad that his kids didn't tell him sooner. We felt like it was somehow our fault that this man was following us, so we figured that my brother and I would get in trouble for the man's actions. A creepy man had been stalking his kids for nearly a year without his knowledge. He was devastated. I sympathize with him now. My dad talked to a woman who waited at the bus stop for her son and explained the situation to her. She had thought that the man was someone that he asked to watch us since she noticed our grandma no longer picked us up. After my dad talked to the woman, my brother and I never saw our stalker again. Years later, I found out that the woman, while waiting for her son to get dropped off by the bus, noticed the creep in the same jumpsuit and the same toque. She walked right up to his face and told him, "If you don't leave those poor kids alone, I won't even call the cops. I'll take matters into my own hands and beat the living heck out of you. I never want to see your face around here again." She was a tough, mean-looking lady, but a huge softie with the biggest heart ever. Anyways, she was mean enough looking that the guy never lurked outside our home or bus stop again. Not sure if this would serve as any significance to you guys, but my upstairs neighbor later claimed that they used to see him go dumpster diving down the street from our home. I met Austin in the fall of 2024 via a message he had sent me over Facebook. I was lonely, really lonely. I just moved to a new city with very few friends because I transferred from community college to university, so I gave him a chance. I messaged him back and we began chatting. We had a mutual friend, so I thought nothing of it. Maybe she told him about me. Maybe he had seen me in passing. Time began to pass and we got much closer. Soon, I met him in person for a date. After this date, things began to move very fast. We hung out all the time and stayed at each other's places almost constantly. He was very sweet at first, and I was so excited to be around someone I believed was so genuinely kind. Fast forward a couple of months and I moved into his apartment. It was a bad idea, I know, but my current living situation was growing increasingly more toxic as I was living with 6 other girls. This was when things began to go downhill though. He introduced me to his daughter Lily. She was so sweet and I adored her. He didn't get to see her much as he would tell me his baby mama was insane and keeping her away from him to control him. As I got to know him more, he began to grow more violent towards me. It started with small things like yelling at me over misplacing a phone charger or not putting something where he thought it belonged. As time began to pass, the instances of his anger increased and became more dramatic. He would scream at me almost every day. It was always my fault if he lost his keys, if I was home from work later than expected because he needed childcare, or if I went to visit family or friends. It didn't matter what the situation was. Everything was my fault. In addition to this, he was serially cheating on me, as I would find out later. Not only that, but somewhere with minors. Some more time passed and we moved to a much larger apartment in a different suburb of our city. Things were well for a while and I still remained oblivious to his horrible internet activity. After a very late night at work, he wakes me up and shows me a tiny little kitten. "I found her at work and brought her home for you," he whispered to me. I named her Stripe, and she was my soul cat. I and this little kitten did absolutely everything together. About a month passes and I come home from work pretty late in the evening as I was a server at the bar. He was infuriated at me as he needed childcare so he could go to work. On top of that, he lost his keys, and it was also my fault. He screamed in my face, called me names, and began to escalate the situation while I just sat there with tears rolling down my face. At some point in his anger, he grabs Stripe and throws her against the bathroom floor because she quote-unquote bit him. She weighed less than 3 pounds, and it wouldn't have hurt. She began to have a seizure and died in my arms on the way to the emergency vet as I gave her CPR. He had just killed my kitten in cold blood. For more context, he also had a dog named Cookie that he beat to the point of seizures. I'm glad to be able to say that I kept this dog and did not allow him to have the dog back again. I felt so trapped. I had no friends to reach out to and no family I felt safe staying with. I was isolated with a very dangerous man. I feared walking in the door. I feared leaving the house. I feared him. I was actually very depressed, and I couldn't afford the rent alone, as he was spending my money on top of his money. I had nowhere to go and no one to help. More time passes. August 2025, and I uncover his internet activity because one of the girls he was talking to messaged me. That was the final straw for me, so I broke up with him. We still lived in the same space, however. He was in the bedroom for his daughter, and I was in my own room. Fast forward to November of 2025, and he verbally assaulted me, saying absolutely nasty things. This escalated to him trying to choke me, throwing me all around the house and being physical to the point I actually feared for my life. I tried to leave and he wouldn't let me. He tried to take my animals and let them out somewhere. He tried to hold a gun to me. It was scary. I couldn't call the cops though. They would have booked us both, and I had finals the next day and was scared to fail all of my classes as I could not afford to repeat them. At some point, I do decide to take the risk to call the cops, but he breaks my phone by snapping it in half. I decide to run for my life, and he forcibly took my house key, but I had my car keys, so I ran. I drove until I got to my father's house and fell asleep on his couch. From this point, he would not leave me alone. With over 100 calls and text messages per day, going from kind to abusive almost every 2 messages. I move in with my very distant mom and take my animals somewhere safe. I pleaded with him to leave my apartment because he wasn't on the lease, but he repeatedly refused as he wanted to fix our family. I begin to settle in at my mom's house and see people that I know reconnecting with old friends. As time passes, so do the holidays. I get over 50 calls on Thanksgiving, 100 on Christmas and New Year's. He was still threatening me and harassing me, and I remained at my mother's. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a CPO, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was scared of it being denied. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a restraining order, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was actually terrified of it being denied. On January 10th, I get to move back to my apartment and it was trashed. I spent 2 weeks working to put the pieces back together and resume some form of my life. I had within the past couple of months started seeing someone long distance casually. He was lovely and offered to help me clean up all the pieces of my life, which was not something he had to do. My ex still harassed me from his number as well as from fake numbers, posing as a stalker threatening my life. He posed as a different person in some of the texts saying he was going to get me. In February, I couldn't take it anymore. I filed the restraining order and was granted an ex parte based on my testimony. I was still getting texts from the fake numbers threatening me, saying that they knew where I was and what I was doing. After the court hearing it all stopped, it was finally silent and I was finally safe. He still tries to find ways to mess with me, like giving people my number, saying I'm easy, or making posts that relate to me and my friends telling me they've seen something weird. He tried to get family to reach out to me and they wouldn't. Now I'm happy. I'm seeing my childhood best friend and we're in love. He's so kind and exactly what I need. I feel safe. But I still look behind my back all the time to see if somebody is following me. I still get texts from numbers asking if I'm easy, then telling me they got my number from Austin. I still need to seek therapy, and I still need to file a report of him violating his restraining order. But overall, I'm happy now. So, let's not meet again, Austin. I hope you get what you deserve, which is nothing. I'm an 18-year-old female living in a small town in Michigan. When this incident took place, I had been working a few hours a week in a small pizzeria. It was in my town, and I had been working there for about a year when my boss decided to go on vacation. She and her family lived in an apartment below the restaurant, and 2 other apartments were overhead. In order to get into these apartments, you had to go to the back of the building and down a sketchy set of stairs or the grass slope where you would find her door and the stairs leading up to the apartments above. Beyond that is a yard and then some woods. I think it's important to mention that there was absolutely no reason to be behind the restaurant unless you were trying to enter the apartments. Now, I usually worked with my mom because we got stuff done easily and I hated answering phones. One night, my mom was feeling ill, so I had to work with another lady. She was very sweet but not very efficient, so I was working hard to keep up and getting a bit agitated when she told me that we needed Parmesan. I agreed to go get it from the store just down the road if she promised to not make me answer phones for the rest of our shift. There were only about 2 hours left, which were normally pretty slow, so I guess it didn't matter that much anyways. As I was getting in my SUV, I saw a guy pull into the small parking lot with a beat-up car and park near the back. He was lanky and wearing oil-stained shop clothes, which was and still is totally normal around here. He got out and retrieved a bag from his trunk and headed down the slope. I know this guy wasn't a renter because I'd never seen him before, and the renters frequently ordered pizza. It was possible he was a friend of one of the renters, but that didn't seem right. It was 9:30 at night, and one renter was a single mom, and the others were 2 brothers with mental health issues that were pretty antisocial. I was getting bad vibes, so I grabbed my knife from the center console and tucked it up my sleeve. Call me paranoid, but there'd been a lot of car fires and break-ins around the time, so I was nervous to go anywhere unarmed. It might have been a stupid thing to do, but I consider my boss a friend and didn't want this guy to hurt any of the renters or steal from any of the apartments. I decided to go see what he was doing, just in case he had any ill intentions. I got out of my car and walked quietly to the slope. There were motion-activated lights, so I could easily see what he was doing. He was fiddling with an old key ring and trying to get into my boss's apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked loudly, so that my coworker could hopefully hear me through the open back door. He was startled but smiled and told me he worked for my boss's husband and he was there to feed the dog and let it out. His smile was creepy, the kind that a liar gives when they're trying really hard to convince you. My boss did have a dog and her husband did own a fabrication shop, so his story seemed to check out, but I still was not convinced. I decided to go get the cheese and check again when I get back. "Okay, let me know if you need help with anything." I tried to sound as normal as possible, but I was seriously creeped out. I hustled at the store and went back to work. I'd been gone for only 15 minutes when I got back, and surprisingly, he'd already gone. I was still feeling suspicious and bad for the dog who'd been shut in for a good portion of the day, so I decided to text my boss when I got out of work. Fast forward 2 hours, and I was on my way home. I got to my door when I decided to check Facebook. As I was scrolling, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of my boss with her dog on the beach from earlier that day. I called my boss and then the police to make a report. It turned out the guy had been fired by my boss's husband earlier that week for making an inappropriate comment about his 19-year-old daughter and repeatedly harassing other female staff. This guy had planned some sort of revenge scheme, but didn't know they had left for vacation. His bag was full of tools and a couple of knives. During questioning, he told them that the only reason he left was because he thought I was watching him. Thankfully, he went to jail for that and a couple other things that he'd been wanted for previously. This still creeps me out to this day, and I hate to think what could have happened if they had been home. This was 10 years ago. Let me start by saying I was, and sometimes still am, a horrible people pleaser. It was much worse then, and I would regularly go against my own judgment and gut feeling for fear of seeming rude or disagreeable. A 28 female was 18. Just moved 3 hours from home to a major city to go to college. I had just a week beforehand ended my long-term relationship because I was starting to see how emotionally and physically abusive he was. I was playing around on Facebook in my dorm room and got a friend request and message from a guy I didn't recognize. The message said something like he'd seen me around campus a few times, joked about similar schedules, blah blah blah, and ended with him asking me to go out with him to see a movie. I read the message and ignored it and the friend request. I joked about it later to roommates who managed to convince me that I was somehow being a jerk by not at least agreeing to meet up with him for a coffee or something. They tossed it'd be good for you to get out into the dating world again, because you're young and in college, have some fun. So I let this eat me up inside until I convinced myself that getting coffee down the block at Starbucks, very public 100 yards from my dorm, would be a safe way to not be rude to this complete stranger. I let him know via Facebook and we make plans for a coffee a few days later. Fast forward to the coffee date. I walk down to Starbucks to meet him and he's standing outside a very closed Starbucks. My mind is already reeling. What do I do now? I'm here. It'd be very rude to just go home because I'd imply that he scares me and I don't want to be alone with him. All of which were accurate though. He starts joking about Starbucks being closed and offers to drive us to a movie. I politely declined, making excuses about money and insisted I was uncomfortable letting him pay for me. He suggested a bar on campus. It was more of a student hangout kind of deal, but they served alcohol. I jumped on that because it was a public place, walking distance, and students and professors would be there. He tries to insist on driving, but I am adamant that we walk. It's a nice night and garbage like that. We start walking over there, and the conversation just starts getting more and more bizarre and making me really uncomfortable. He starts asking me if I'm okay with him being Indian and if I've ever been with an Indian guy before, saying that most girls didn't seem to want to date Indian guys. I answer questions but otherwise don't really involve myself in the conversation. He was fine with that because apparently he had enough to say for both of us. We finally get to where he can see the bar and it's closed. I start really looking around and notice that there are not very many people around. Maybe one or two running across the green and a biker here and there, but all pretty far off. I am beyond uncomfortable and trying to come up with a polite excuse to get myself home as quickly as possible. He starts to walk toward the bay and back by the big docks. I know the area well enough, my friend. I used to like to hang out back there to watch the water and smoke because there's never any people there. I'm panicking internally, but mentally, I can't justify turning tail and running because he hasn't actually done anything to warrant that response yet. So I just follow behind. He continues on his rant about women and Indian men getting angrier and angrier by the minute. You probably think I'm ugly, don't you? White women always hate Indian men. You were all stuck up, he said. You think you're so much better than me. Even Indian women don't want to date me, he said. They would rather be with a white guy with less body hair. That's why you don't ever try to talk to me when I see you running back and forth to class. At this point, he stopped walking and is just pacing and yelling. I'm terrified but trying to stay calm and use all of my talking skills to talk him down. I can't put into words how hateful and full of blind rage his tone was. My back is to the bay and only a few feet from the water. I'm trying to move myself casually to where he's closer to the water and I'm closer to my escape, should I need to run. Fight or flight is going full blast, and at this point, I think running is going to make me angrier and I won't get very far. I start telling him I agree with him, how women are awful and shallow and they should give him a chance. Anything I can come up with because I honestly thought he was going to take all of his rage at the female gender out on me. That they would find my body floating in the bay tomorrow morning. By some miracle, it worked. He calmed down and started telling me I was different than the other girls. I just kept up the same routine. I started walking back towards my dorm slowly, like you would with a friend just casually trying to get moving again. It worked. He walked with me back to my dorm building. I tried to convince him there was no need, that I could walk myself back, but he said he was worried I could run into some creep if I was by myself. There was only one building for the whole campus, and he already saw me leave it, so damage was already done there. He asked if he could come inside with me to my room. I lied and said I couldn't have guests after 9 and booked it inside. I hid in the front lobby watching to see if he hung around outside or left right away. Thankfully, he left. I briefly explained to the RA what happened and that he should not ever be let into the building no matter what. The only door that could get inside the building was that one, and it needed a key card to get in. I went back up to my room, blocked him on Facebook, and then for added measure ended up disabling my account for a while. I also went back home with my mom that weekend and bought some pepper spray. This is going to be a long one since I've never managed to really put the whole story together until now. This happened in a relatively small town and city in Canada in April of 2016, right before I graduated high school. I was 17 at the time. It was my grad year, and most of the people in my grad class were partying and planning activities to celebrate our upcoming graduation. One of the traditions in my town is to play a grid game called Rainbow, which is basically a version of Predator-Prey. A bunch of people would meet up at a location on one side of the city, and the goal was for the runners to make it to a spot on the other side of the city without getting caught by the seekers, which were groups of 3 to 4 in their cars. Runners also went in groups of 3 to 4, but they had to be on foot. My grad class was around 200 people, and I would say this particular night, there were about 60 to 70 people playing. This takes place after it's completely dark outside. It was probably around 11 p.m. that night. I had planned to be a runner in a group of 4 with my boyfriend at the time, as well as my friend and her boyfriend. However, my now ex-boyfriend bailed last minute to go do drugs at a different party with his friends, which left me as a third wheel with my friend and her man. No problem, right? I should have never gone. Now for reference, I am tiny. Like 4'11" tiny, and weighed around 80 pounds at the time. I genuinely look like I am around 13 if I don't wear makeup and you don't get a good look at me. Anyways, my friend and I got all dressed up in all black and put war paint on our cheeks, and the 3 of us headed to the spot. I live in what I've always considered a safe town, mostly full of families or retired people. There are only a few badish neighborhoods in this city. The game started and we all ran, and all was fun up until about an hour, in midnight. We had to cross through one of said neighborhoods. While we were walking along a residential street sidewalk, one of the seeker cars came ripping down the street and the 3 of us ran. Of course, my friend and her man stayed together and I got separated somehow in the scuffle. Once the seekers weren't in the immediate area, I started calling out to my friends and could hear their voices somewhere in the distance. I texted my friend and she said they were in the alley on the other side of the houses, while I was still on the sidewalk in front. I had 2 options. I could walk to the end of the block and find the alley that way, but I was about 20 houses away in either direction and I knew for a fact that there were seekers nearby who had seen us and knew we were in the area. My other option was to cut through someone's yard and immediately be in the alley and reunite with my group. I chose the latter. Why I did this, I will never know. Like I said, I am a tiny girl and this was known to be a rough neighborhood. I looked at the nearest houses and spotted one that didn't have a front gate. His lawn went straight into the backyard, save for a few shrubs on the side of the house. I thought this meant that I could go straight through and that there wouldn't be a back fence. I chose this house and stepped over the shrubs and jogged towards the back. As I did, a motion light came on that illuminated the backyard. This scared me, but I was already in, so I figured I would just get out as fast as possible. When the light came on, however, I noticed that there was in fact a fence, and about a 6 to 7 foot tall one at that. I certainly couldn't jump it, but there was a gate with a latch that I ran to. I remember having to stand on my tippy toes to even reach the latch. While fumbling with it, I heard a noise. It was the sound of the back door of the house opening. The houses in this area were quite small and often dilapidated. I would say that the back door was only around 15 feet from the fence. It had some concrete stairs with wrought iron railings. I remember turning my head towards the noise and having around 1 second to see this gigantic bald man in his stained white briefs charging at me from the store. Probably 6'5" and, I don't know, maybe 300 pounds. He hit me like a freight train, slammed into me so that I hit the fence hard. I think he came at me with his hands at neck height, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember, though, vividly, was how he picked me up, my full body weight by my neck. I remember trying to shriek and hearing my own voice barely choking out a sound. He immediately started towards the door that he came from. As he dragged me towards his house, I remember being sure that something horrific was going to happen to me and that I was going to die. I remember his hairy, sweaty body absorbing my kicks and attempts to hit him. I was trying to scream the whole time, but both his hands around my neck were an unescapable, silencing death trap. Right in front of his steps, my iPhone flew out of my hoodie pocket and hit the concrete, reminding me of its existence altogether. But now it was sitting on the ground as he hauled me off the stairs. I still don't know how I mustered the strength, but that wrought iron railing gave me something to finally leverage myself against. I managed to pull myself away from his grasp, using that fence, just long enough to grab my phone. His hand slipped off my neck, but caught my hoodie's neckline, which tore to my sternum. I was wearing another shirt underneath. The hoodie is still the grim reminder of this day. For some reason, I can't throw it away. Now, he immediately caught me again, but in my mind, I was for sure going to die if I didn't have my phone to somehow call for help. But being out of his grasp allowed for another thing. I could scream. I knew my friends were somewhere in the back alley, and I screamed bloody murder at the top of my lungs once I could. He caught me again and dragged me into his house, and I vaguely remember him trying to cover my mouth or grab my throat again, but I'm not sure. Upon entering his house, I saw where he was taking me. The steps into his pitch-black basement were only about 4 feet from his back door, and he was headed straight for it. I was certain that I was going to be dragged into his rape/murder dungeon, and nobody would ever see me again. This freak had 1 foot down the stairs when he heard it. Before his back door fully shut, there came a sound from outside that I believe saved my life. It was my friend calling my name. They heard me screaming and were very close to the yard I was in, so naturally, they started freaking out and calling my name. And this guy heard them, and he froze in his tracks, eyes fixed out the back door now. He realized I wasn't alone. All at once, he let go of me and stepped in front of the door, blocking my escape back through it. But then he started asking me all sorts of questions like he was in a frenzy. Why were you in my yard? You were stealing and vandalizing, weren't you? I was pretty messed up, but starting to explain the game I was playing, referring heavily to the fact that I was with a group of friends and was just trying to cut through his yard. I was, now that I got a good look at him, completely naked aside from some stained, saggy white briefs. After about 30 seconds, my friend called my phone, and I have never picked up a call so fast. I immediately started yelling at her that I'm in someone's house and he's trying to kidnap me, what the house looked like and stuff. I stayed back from him and stayed on the phone with my friend while he was screaming at me that he performed a civilian's arrest because I was vandalizing his property. He repeatedly threatened to call the police, to which I said, "Please do," every time. The police would get me out of this house. He never did call them, but he made me write my name on a piece of paper, which I did because I just wanted him to let me go. He kept me in his house, seemingly trying to figure out what to do. Until around 2 minutes later, there was violent banging at the front door. My friends had found his house and were just going to town on this guy's door. Then he finally let me go back out the back door. I promptly threw up on his front lawn from nerves as soon as I was reunited with my friends. My gift to him. You could stop listening here. The rest is what happened after. Disclaimer, I understand that I was trespassing, but I was not stealing or vandalizing. What he did, I believe to be assault and unlawful confinement, not a civilian's arrest. And may I remind you that I am under 5 feet tall, standing on my little tippy toes to reach the gate, my long blonde hair hanging down my back. He knew I was a little girl, and I don't believe for a second that he truly thought I was a threat to his property. I will never forget the way he stepped 1 foot to that basement. So it goes. Aftermath. Later, I had some bruises on my neck. My hair was coming out in clumps from where it had been ripped out during the struggle, and I was missing many of my piercings, including my belly ring somehow. From the sheer violence of the altercation, I told my parents and whatnot about it and went to bed that night. I don't think I slept. The next morning, my mom convinced me to go to the police. At the time, I remember wanting to just hide somewhere safe for the rest of eternity, but my mom convinced me that he can't just get away with what he did to me. I went to the police station where I had to wait around an hour to speak with a constable. Because I live in a smaller town, there aren't a lot of cops on duty on a Sunday, and the cop I would talk to was currently on another call. What we didn't know at the time was that my dad was the reason the cops were busy. Now, my dad kind of looks like a freak. He looks like a long-haired biker and drives old vintage cars with ported exhaust. So they're as loud as a Harley. He was angry. He pulled up at this guy's house and apparently stood and stared in his front window for a long time. Then he headed to the back alley and did the same. I learned that this guy had multitudes of security cameras all over his house, and my dad apparently stared into one in the back for upwards of 8 minutes without moving. The guy called the cops on my dad, who left just as they showed up. This guy then gave a statement to the cops before I got there, claiming that I had been vandalizing his property and was sending people to further mess with his house. Of course, he had no evidence of vandalism, and only my dad being freaky as evidence that anyone was going to mess with it. He told the officers they did not have footage of the altercation, which I think is BS. He just didn't want them to see him attacking me and dragging me into his house. The same cops came back to the station where I was waiting, and before I got to give any statement, they described my dad to me and asked if I knew him. I told them it was my dad, and they said, "We don't know who you're affiliated with, but you need to leave this man alone." I remember being taken aback by this because here I was to give my statement, and they'd already decided this guy was the victim of the situation. I was pretty shell-shocked, and trying to tell the story was clearly tricky for me. The cop hardly wrote anything down, and then he basically threw the book at me. He told me, "You were the one trespassing. Do you understand that Mr. X could press charges on you?" I was flabbergasted. I had literally been attacked and had bruises on my neck, a torn sweater, and hair falling out in clumps as evidence, and the cop said I was the criminal. This scared me because I had ambitions for the future that could not include any kind of record. This shut me up. I agreed to let it go and left the situation. In hindsight, I think the cops really didn't want to deal with the situation and just wanted it to go away. They succeeded. For a few years, I was terrified of seeing this man again and was convinced he was going to eventually show up at the post office I worked at, since his neighborhood was in my outlet's jurisdiction, but I never did. My dad continued to drive very slowly past his house from time to time, including the alley, and even got one of his actual biker friends to park right out front and smoke a cigarette while looking over at the house. The cop showed up on him, but it's not illegal to pull over and have a smoke. I like to think this guy lived in fear that the Hells Angels were after him, at least for a while. I coped by convincing myself that this was his messed up idea of a citizen's arrest and that he wasn't trying to kidnap me. But telling the story reminds me that may have not been the case. I've never told this story in full before, so if you made it this far, thanks for reading. This happened to me last Friday. I'm currently in my senior year of college. I have some pretty decent scores, but I want to make a stellar statement of purpose before applying to my dream school. For an MS in computational biology. Fingers crossed, guys. As both my younger sister and I are currently home from school on winter break, and she may be possibly the loudest person to ever exist, I typically sequester myself away in the library with a large Duncan. This is needed. My strong suit lies in mathematics and not writing, so I need all of the brain power I can get. You might be saying, what is she doing on Reddit? Write your essay. But I need a break or I will go crazy, guys. I get to the library and head to my normal spot, which nobody seems to know about. Second floor tucked in the corner. Good Wi-Fi, near a cozy heater. No windows to distract me with an enticing view. Except there's somebody sitting at my table. I mutter a sorry and turn to walk away. This man stops me, claiming I can share his table. There didn't seem to be a lot of open spots downstairs, so I accepted. About 30 minutes of silence later, he asks what I'm so intently working on. I explain. He chuckles and says, "A girl with a brain. You shouldn't be wasting all of your time at school, though. You're too pretty." Which, ew. I don't really feel like debating this, so I just awkwardly laugh. He goes on to explain how if he had a woman who was so smart, he would never let her leave the house, or fear she might discover something better. I ignore this. He then says something really weird. Has anyone ever told you look like Dag? Huh? What do you mean? I ask. The Dag, from Mad Max. It takes me a few seconds to process this. I have honestly had a couple of friends text me after seeing the movie and tell me they see some resemblance, but I'm not going to participate in this conversation. No. Short, blunt, and to the point. We continue on in silence. At this point, I've chalked the afternoon up as a loss. My concentration is shot to shit, and I won't be able to focus anymore with this creep here. I fake a phone call because society tells me to be polite, and I still have trouble not doing so. Huh. How funny. My mom needs me to come home in the middle of the day. I gather my stuff and nod to the man. Walk to the car and curse when I realize I left my flash drive on the table. Worried the guy might have taken it, I rush back, and the flash drive is there, but he's gone. Weird. Well, if he's gone and my table is open, I guess I'll stay. 5 minutes later, I'm all but engrossed back at my work. Here's something important. Not being able to find any hair ties. Seriously, where did they go? I simply stuck my hair up on my head with a big old claw clip. So there's me typing on my laptop, when I suddenly feel my hair tumble down my head, and a hand squeezes it. I turn around to see the man who doesn't let my hair go. I could start a set with you, he mutters, a sickening grin on his face. Friends, if you need to scream bloody murder and want to make sure you're heard, a library is a very good place to do it. I don't think, just screamed. About 10 patrons and a librarian came running up. I instantly started crying, only to have the man say, "My girlfriend and I got in a fight." The security guard separated us, and upon hearing my side of the story, the man was kicked out of the library. The guard took me to my car. Still really freaked out about this one, but I'll get over it. So, I'm on my school netball team, and we have practice every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. My town is quite small, and I live literally on the outskirts of the town. I have a 20-minute bike ride to and from school, and live on a country road. That's also quite long, with only about 4 other houses, so when I finish practice, I go the opposite way home to all my friends who live near the town center. Since last week, Tuesday, we've been practicing till around 8:30 p.m. for our upcoming game this Saturday, with the girls' school on the other side of town from us. Because it's so late, most of the girls on our team have their parents pick them up, but for me, I just get on my bike and go home. So it was Tuesday, last week, when we were coming out of the changing rooms and going onto the court when I noticed this guy sitting on a bench down the hall, just watching me and my friends go in. I figured that he was a parent or something, so I just ignored him, but he looked pretty creepy. He had a greasy beard and receding long hair, a big double chin and glasses. Your textbook creep. My friend Rachel saw him too, so we asked a couple of girls when we went into the court if they knew him, but none of us did. Still, I just ignored him and continued on playing. He was there on Wednesday too. He sat on the same bench in the hall, looking at us coming out into the gym court. Rachel said that she was finding him a bit weird, and I agreed, so we told our coach, and she came out and told him to leave. I didn't see what happened, but she told us he's gone, so I didn't worry about it. On Friday, he wasn't there when we came into the court, but our coach told us to all sit down for a moment. When we sat down, she told us that parents from our school had been complaining about a man loitering around the school and trying to talk to the 9th and 10th graders, which is my year and the year above. I knew it was probably him, and she looked at me and Rachel while speaking, which I think confirmed it. She told us all, though, to just take safety precautions and try to get all of our parents to pick us up. I called my mom after practice, so she canceled work and picked me up. Yesterday, we were moved to the other court on the other side of the fitness center, closer to the factories and less quiet back streets behind, so the boys' basketball team could play a game or something. The guy wasn't there because the changing rooms aren't connected to a hallway in that part, but I was still pretty nervous because my mom said she couldn't pick me up. Practice went as normal and we all left through the back. I got my bike and said bye to Rachel and my other friends, put in my earphones, got my bike, and was about to get on my bike when the guy comes out of a doorway down the back. I start panicking. My friends must have walked a block by now to the front where their parents are waiting. If I get on my bike now, I'll reach them, I thought. He walks forward, and in the street light I see scissors in his hand. "Please, can I have some hair?" he said. I was frozen still, shaking, thinking these are my last moments, so I just scream as loud as I can. I completely throw him off guard, and he drops the scissors and runs like nobody's business down the alley. Carly, this girl on my team, runs down with her mom, and I tell them what happened. When they take me back inside, I find my coach and tell her he came back, and they all stay with me and comfort me. But I just want to go home, so my coach drives me in her pickup truck. I call my mom at home, but she tells me he must have been just ill mentally. And I shouldn't have been scared, as he probably wouldn't have hurt me. I guess she's right, but scary creepy guy, let's not meet. At least we won't this week, because I'll be missing today and Friday's practice sessions. I have Arnold-Chiari malformation, so I usually like to keep it quiet and not be the loud one in my group of friends, as it causes me extreme headaches, almost to the point of passing out because of the pain and also dizziness. But one particular day, my friends had convinced me to just take a lot of ibuprofen to counteract it beforehand, so that's what I did. We had all decided to go to a large spring, which is used by the locals for swimming since it's pretty deep. Our whole group decided on a little friendly competition to swim from one side to the other, just for shits and giggles. I wish it would have remained so lighthearted. Me being the person I was, I took swimming lessons for 11 years and was on major swim teams in my county. I made it first and was flaunting it by waving to the rest of our group, who were only still halfway across, even though the most athletic of us were only 2/3 of the way there. Anyways, as I waited, it was a very forestry natural place, with vegetation covering up almost anything, so it was unlikely my group saw me at this point after I stopped waving and boasting. I felt a presence behind me, but before I could turn around, a male hand grasped my mouth and pulled me down so that I was sitting on him. The position resembled how a grandfather would hold his granddaughter on his lap, but much more sinister and forceful. I tried to kick and scream, but my strength was slowed a lot from the amount of ibuprofen I took to counteract my Chiari. He had a rusty box cutter and it was resting dangerously on my throat. As I was struggling, he pulled my face closer to his and said, "I could kill you right now and I would enjoy every minute of it." I was still forced onto his lap and he was strangely petting my hair like a small child. Thankfully, one of my athletic friends finally made it across and started rustling through the bushes to come get me. As soon as the man heard my friend call my name, he ran away without a trace. I collapsed into my friend's arms and sputtered and spit and cried out my words. We went home and tried to file a report with the police/guards that own and patrol the springs. Minutes after we left the cabin, I heard them laughing and joking about how I was making it up, and saying the stupid woman must have been PMSing. I broke into tears again. To this day, I still remember the lustful and hungry look in his eyes as if he would get some sort of enjoyment from my dead corpse. Honestly, that was the worst feeling, being that close to death and not having it even in fate's hands, but those of an evil human being. My stepfather is an ex-alcoholic and drug addict who is heavily involved in several Catholic churches and the local AA community. The drugs and alcohol must have seriously fried his brain because he still has really bad judgment and decision-making skills, especially when it comes to people. He has brought so many sketchy people into my life. Thankfully, nothing serious happened. I get it, he's trying to help others who are struggling with the same battle he went through, and maybe he is making a difference in some people's lives, but he's been bringing these kinds of people into my life since I was 4 years old. Some of them even lived with us for a while. I had kids young. I was 20 when I had my son, and 23 when I had my daughter. When my son had his first birthday, my stepdad and mom retired. My mom had me when she was 40 and decided to travel, going on mission trips with their church and moving to another state. They started working with this Catholic organization that specifically helps people who struggle with alcohol and drug addictions. The church gave them housing among their nuns and priests and paid them all a small amount of money to buy food and necessities while they worked with them. One year around Christmas time, my parents came home for the holiday and brought an older nun with them. She was probably in her 50s. My family got together and went to Santa's workshop, which was super crowded. My mom, stepdad, their nun friends, and my sisters and their kids came too. My daughter was about 6 months old, maybe less. She is a beautiful red-headed baby. I have received many comments from family and strangers on how beautiful she and her red hair are, and probably have a few other stories of people who don't understand personal boundaries regarding children. The nun was immediately taken by how beautiful my baby is and kept touching her, talking to her and wanting to hold her. It was a bit uncomfortable because this was my first time meeting her. Also, she wasn't acting this way with any of the other children that were there with us. My son, who was a 3-year-old at the time and had since been diagnosed with ADHD, was a handful and running all over the place, getting into everything. It's so hard going to places with him and her without their dad. He didn't come with us because he was most likely working. So I think I was distracted because my son was getting into something he wasn't supposed to, and I let go of the stroller for a second, and this nun immediately took it. She told me she would give me a break, and since she was a friend of my parents, and my family was all around us, I decided to let this nun push my daughter in the stroller. Another incident happened where my son was getting into something, and I was distracted again for less than a minute, and when I turned back around, the nun and my daughter were gone. I freaked out, and my whole family was still around me. Nobody knew where this nun went, and she didn't say anything to anyone about leaving. My family and I immediately started looking everywhere. Luckily, there were many of us, and we found the nun at the front of the building, right near the exit. It was terrifying. When we found her, she just said that she was taking my daughter on a stroll. I decided to leave right after that happened, and so did everyone else in my family. Luckily, I haven't seen her since. So yeah, creepy old nun that knows my parents. Let's not meet again. Edit. I posted this as a comment response, but somebody suggested I add it to my post. I forgot to mention some of the weird comments the nun had made about how if she hadn't become a nun and had children, she imagined they would look just like my daughter because red hair runs in her family. Another small but interesting detail is my oldest sister, who was there too with her 3 kids, also had a baby girl who was only a couple of months old at the time. I don't understand why the nun lashed onto my daughter in particular, other than having her red hair. Is hair color that big of a deal, or would it have been because I was a young mother and didn't have their father with me? Update. I called my mom today and asked a few questions about the nun. I believe she legitimately is a nun. She worked with her organization and was introduced to them by another nun and priest they know. She frequently worked with them when they lived in Maryland, setting up retreats and meetings for addicts. At one point, the nun had planned to go on a mission trip with my mother, but something came up and it didn't happen. My mom and stepdad moved around a lot during their retirement and haven't talked to her since they left Maryland, which was about 2 or 3 years ago. They recently moved back home and left the organization, and my stepfather works for a whole new one doing similar work, and my mom fully retired. My mom doesn't think there was anything weird about this situation, that it was no big deal, and the nun took my daughter on a stroll and didn't think to tell anyone where she was going. I haven't seen her since because she still lives in Maryland. My parents don't even talk to her anymore, and I actively try to avoid people my parents hang around now. I am a teenager who helps his dad out on the allotment. If you don't know, an allotment is like a mini farm. You can plant veggies, have animals like chickens or rabbits to care for. This happened recently and it still creeps me out. In the evening, my dad says we need to go to the allotment to feed our chickens, as he forgot to feed them earlier that day. It was around 8 p.m. when I agreed and went into the car and started driving. When we got to our allotment, which is like a 15-minute drive, it was already dark outside. Not a lot, but dark. I opened the gates to the allotment, let my dad drive in, and then closed them. As I was about to, though, I saw a black car outside. The car belonged to a guy that used to be chill with my dad, but they both kind of fell off from talking to each other. My dad said he was becoming more mentally ill as the guy had a divorce and got his kids taken by the mother. The guy lives on the allotment now, even sleeping there. Remember, there are other people too in this allotment area, around 20 other ones, but there was no one else except me, dad, and the guy. After my dad parked the car, we got out and started getting the food for the chickens out the trunk. While my dad was doing that, I looked at his ex's friend's allotment, only to see him staring at us. It was dark, so I could only see a shadow of him, but I knew he was staring at us. I had a gut feeling, but I decided to ignore it. We went to the allotment, fed the chickens, and were about to go home until my dad almost forgot about something. He went to the shed at the end of the allotment to fetch something, and I was going to enter but had a feeling to wait it out instead. As I told my dad how much longer till he finds what he needs, I turned back to face our gate being opened. I didn't see it at first, but saw the guy trying to enter our allotment quietly. He stared at me and slowly closed the gate before just disappearing. I didn't react or say anything. I just stood there. I thought of telling my dad but didn't want to scare him or something. In the end, this isn't a horror movie where I should scream like a girl. When my dad left the shed, now we could go. As we were leaving, we heard a sound like an axe hitting the wood non-stop. We knew something was wrong. We quickly walked to our car, started it, and went to the gate. I left the car, creeped out by the guy being around in the allotment. I quickly opened the gate and let my dad drive through. As I was closing the gate, I saw something that terrified me immediately. The guy was just standing there, probably 20 meters away from me, looking at me. I couldn't see any details, but just darkness on him. He was holding something in his hand, but then he just moved and went into some bushes. My dad got out of the car to lock the gate. He looked at the bushes through the closed gate and rushed to his car. When we left and started driving, I told my dad he saw what I saw. He said he saw him hiding in the bushes, and he was squatting looking at us. Dad said he saw him holding something too, like an axe or a knife. We left pretty terrified, but we tried to laugh it off, knowing we were probably close to being attacked, or worse, dead. We came back to the allotment at the same time, around 8 p.m., a few days after what happened. We saw the guy's car in the allotment, and we knew we needed to be quick with feeding the chickens. As we did so, everything was going fine until we were about to leave. My dad stopped me and we head over a blue shed. My dad told me, "He's there. He's in the bushes." My heart dropped. I told my dad where he was and he said, "A 5-second walk," and we were done. We quickly ran to the car, closed it, and drove off. For a second I saw him. He had an axe. He wanted to sneak up on us and harm us. He wanted to kill us. The events in this story actually messed with my head a bit, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had a few friends in this new country, and was glad to find a place to live with some cool people my age. I started hanging with this crew, which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were cool. There was this one friend of my roommates named Frank that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was odd because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel slightly uncomfortable. First time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of questions that would suss me out. But he had a decent sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy and he was like, "Oh, you didn't know? Last year he found his wife and her brothers murdered in their flat. He is under investigation, but he didn't do it." I was taken aback by this. How could they really know he didn't do it, and why do they want to hang around with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He had been in prison most of the time in between then and now for violence. This did not help me in trusting him. I could not believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated but released for a lack of evidence. Back home at our place, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all of my friends would nod and believe him. I felt crazy being the only one who didn't believe it. He must have sensed it because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him. I said, "Yeah, sure I did," because by now I was starting to get really afraid of him. I asked him about the murders and he told me his vision of the event where he, according to him, found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had doubts. To my horror, he would at another time crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out because I couldn't figure out what he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid and started believing that he might actually be planning on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him. At one point, I started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder me like he murdered those poor souls. This was a horrible time for me. On top of that, police had been tipped off about the relatively large amounts of weed being kept in the house and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me menacingly, as I always found him. "You are alright," he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you're okay." Kid you not. If he told me this, the others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was very glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly after, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and found my way back to some normality in my life. That's when I realized how messed up the whole thing was. I had been isolated with all of this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was properly mental and was convicted of 4 life sentences. He will never be a free man again. I'm not a great storyteller, but here we go. In 1985, when I was 15, I got a job doing dishes at a pizza place. After a while, I got moved up to the kitchen, making the pies and pasta. The owner usually had teenage kids or drifters, homeless vets, etc. doing the dishes, and he paid cash. On one particular Saturday after our shift ended, this scrawny white drifter who slept out of his beat-up car asked me if I could go to the mall and help him return something. I had asked him earlier to buy me beer, and so this was our trade-off. Off to the mall we went in his 1970s land barge. The item did not look new, but I tried to return the telescope to the store and, without a receipt, I was turned away. This drifter didn't seem that concerned with the failed transaction, but insisted that we cruise the mall parking lot looking for girls. Teen girls, as it turned out, mind you. It really only seemed cheesy to me at the time, but it really creeps me out today. Looking back, I see what he was doing. Returning an item for a refund was just a ploy, and to me being a decent-looking teenage kid, it only struck me later that he was trying to lure girls into the car. Luckily, none of them took the offer. His MO was ridiculous, and I was only embarrassed. He was in his mid-30s, but I could have and would have taken him down if something happened. A few months passed, and he was long gone from the dishwashing job, and I hadn't seen him since. I was in my friend's neighborhood, and we were walking to the basketball court at the park to shoot hoops. Who rolls up on me in the street? Creepy drifter in his old car. I was thinking, oh, not this guy again. After a brief hello, I said we were headed to play hoops, and he said something like this as he drove away. "I'm just looking for girls to meet. You know how it is." Keep in mind that this was somewhat isolated middle-class neighborhood, and he had no business being up in there. It was foolish of me to not report him, and it still bothers me. I just thought of him as an asshole when I should have realized the threat. I hope he didn't harm any girls. I posted my scariest experience yesterday, but my husband and I had quite a few freaky incidents where we used to live. A small town in North Carolina, and one particularly creepy one near our new place in Texas. This is one from North Carolina. It didn't scare me as much then as it should have until it was too late. We never felt safe living there, but again, had to for 3 more years. We lived in an old barn that had been renovated into 2 apartments, split right down the middle. Both sides had 2 floors and a basement. It had a pond down the hill, behind it in a huge field stretched out in place of a front yard. Right smack dab in the middle of the field was a junk pile. Old rusty trash cans, tools, and just junk. It also had the remains of an old doghouse our neighbor had built and then set out there to rot when the dog died. Important later. So we had neighbors on the other side of the barn/duplex. A very sweet older couple. They had a garden right around the corner of the house where the wife would spend her day while her husband was at work. They mentioned one day that food had started disappearing from the kitchen. I thought I was losing my mind until an entire loaf of bread disappeared. They chalked it up to their delinquent daughter, stopping in without telling them and shopping as she'd done it before. Months went by and every now and again she'd mention something her daughter had stolen. Canned food, prepared meals from the fridge, a couple of pots and pans, some toilet paper, and so on. They never reported it because they didn't want their daughter to be in trouble. We just thought the whole thing was sad. Weird stuff started happening around the house. We found the remnants of a campfire by the pond one day and a bar of Irish Spring soap floating in the water. One day I looked out the window towards the pond and saw what I thought was a person standing near the water. It scared the heck out of me and I pointed it out to my husband. The longer we looked, we realized it was actually an item of clothing hanging from a tree. Maybe to dry. We were too spooked to go look and it was gone the next day. Here's where it gets super scary. We started missing food. It only happened twice, but the second time we had gone on a rather long walk up our driveway to the mailbox. We'd left the door unlocked, and when we got back, the ingredients for grilled cheese were on the kitchen counter, and there was a hot pan still on the stove. We called 911, and they did a search of the yard. They didn't look in the field because it was just so wide open, with just the junk pile in the middle. Finally, one day our neighbor left her door open for 5 minutes and went to the garden right by the house. In that time, her purse was stolen from the living room. No cars had pulled up, so somebody had been watching her and took the opportunity. She called the police, and the next day they did another search. This time they went to the field and realized there was the old makeshift doghouse. Inside, there was a bed of old blankets, food wrappers in a neat pile, 2 beers, rolls of toilet paper, our neighbor's missing pans, heroin stuff, and the sweet lady's missing purse. Everything out of it and stuffed with leaves to use as a pillow. There had been a heroin addict living on our property for months, stealing from us, bathing in the pond, and watching us from the best opportunity to do so. He never stole anything of value except for the purse, so I think he intended to be there a long while. I guess when he came back and saw his house empty, he just never came back. This happened 6 years ago when I was 13. Bear with me in my story because I've been on this subreddit a while without actually posting on it. I have a lot of creepy encounters, but this is the first I'd like to share. Anyways, during the summer, my mom had to leave us and tend to my grandpa, who had cancer and lived over 300 miles away. It was just my dad, my 16-year-old brother, and I for all 3 months of summer vacation. My dad worked all day, and my brother Dean went to summer school, which meant I was home alone for a good portion of the day. We live in a fairly safe neighborhood, and I knew always to lock the doors. One day, I was preparing to cook lunch. Grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are the bomb. I was heating up the frying pan when I heard scratching coming from the front door. I turned off the heat and inched closer to the front door. I slowly see the doorknob jiggle and slowly turn. Thankfully, the top lock was still locked, but I heard it being tampered with. I quietly run into the kitchen and grab the frying pan. I really don't know why. I crawl into our pantry and post a status on Facebook asking someone to call the police and send them to my address. I hear somebody enter the room and walk around. They don't really sound like they're doing anything except walking. Then the footsteps get louder and louder. The pantry door opens and I hit the person in the head with as much force as I could with the hot pan. The person, a man in his 40s, is knocked out. The police arrive a few minutes after this happens. They call my dad and my brother to inform them of what happened. The police officer takes me to the station because I refuse to let them leave, and my brother agrees to meet me there. It turns out that the guy had a knife in his pocket and duct tape in the other. The police searched his car, which was parked in front of the house. Found rope, trash bags, girls' clothing, another knife, and a single picture of me in the glove compartment. I really don't know what would have happened to me.